to the 30th annual Hanmusu Colloquium. This colloquium is particularly special because this is our first time, I believe, collaborating with the Textile Museum. Right? So that makes it doubly important. And after this event today, and after lunch, please go and visit the Textile Museum. It is open for you to enjoy and witness a time capsule, because the only time, or the last time it was shown in public was in 1894-3 at the Chicago World Fair. And the second time it was shown is today, or not today, but here in GW. And the other reason today is such a special event is it's the 30th anniversary of Hanmusu Colloquium. This is quite a feat in any form of academia. For a colloquium to run this long with such academic rigor and interest from the public. So we all welcome you. And I hope you enjoyed today's Hanmusu Colloquium. I am your moderator and host, Immanuel Kim. Allow me to introduce our first speaker, well, not speaker, but the person who will provide opening remarks. Professor Jisoo Kim is a Korea Foundation Associate Professor of History, International Affairs, and East Asian Languages and Literatures, and of course the director of the Institute for Korean Studies at GW, GWIX. She also currently serves as Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Korean Studies. She is the author of Emotions of Justice, Gender, Status, and Legal Performance in Joseon, Korea, which was awarded in 2017, the James Blaze Prize for the Association of Asian Studies. Jisoo?
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction. I thought he was not going to introduce himself, his name, when he began with such a long remarks. And I thought maybe I should introduce him, but then good that you mentioned your name. But he's also, but you didn't mention your title. He's the chair of the East Asian Languages and Literatures Department, and also the Korea Foundation and Kim-Renaud, Korean Literature and Cultural Studies. All right, well, welcome. Good morning, everyone. This is such an exciting day. I don't know how many years I've been waiting. I know since Lee, since I began talking with Lee when he came to GW, I knew there was going to be an exhibition on the Korean textile. And the first year it was, they had an exhibition on the Qing Empire's textile. The following year they had it, I forget exactly which year, but the following year they had an exhibition on Okinawa textile. And then the next year was going to be a Korean textile exhibition. But that was, I don't know when, but it got postponed 1 or 2 times. But of course, due to COVID, it was again postponed, and finally we are having it. The exhibition is taking place right now at the museum, and finally we are able to host this year's Hanmusu Colloquium with that theme, Korean fashion, from Royal Court to Runway. So I would like to first, of course, this is the annual Hanmusu Colloquium, and this year is the 30th Hanmusu Colloquium, which is, as Immanuel mentioned, it is the longest, not only just in the DMV area, but in the world, I think. Kyunghee can correct me, but really in the world, and it's just so honored. And of course, this Hanmusu Colloquium was named after a renowned female author, Sook, which is also Professor Kim-Renaud's mother. We are just so honorable to be hosting this colloquium at GW for this long. This has been organized by the East Asian Languages and Literatures Department for many years, and since the GW Institute for Korean Studies was established, GWIX supported in co-organizing this colloquium along with ELL. Again, I think you'll be hearing us saying several times that this is very special because we are not just we have not just prepared this colloquium amongst our faculty, but we are collaborating with GW Textile Museum this year. And this theme, so this September, we had the privilege of visiting the museum and taking the tour and listening to Lee's explanation of the exhibition. And it was just so exciting to learn about the Chicago's World Fair in 1893. Despite its history in Korea at the time, it was such a period of turmoil in Korean history. It just was on the eve of colonization, and there's just a lot going on, and yet they participated in this Chicago's World Fair to make Korea visible to the world. And then from the Royal Court textile to the present day fashion in Korea, in South Korea. So, and it's just so exciting to see how fashion and clothing is used as a lens to examine Korean history from the late 19th century to today. So I hope through the presentations today and also the tour at the museum, you'll be able to learn about Korean textile and history of fashion. I would like to, of course, I have to thank our organizers. First of all, I'd like to thank Lee Talbot, the curator of the museum, and his team for putting this wonderful exhibition at GW this semester. And also thanks to our distinguished speakers for sharing their work on Korean fashion. And I'm just so excited to learn what they have to say today. Very much looking forward to the discussions. And also, I must not forget our co-organizers, the East Asian Languages and Literatures, the GW Textile Museum, and the GW Institute for Korean Studies for co-organizing this year's colloquium, and our sponsor, the Korea Foundation, for their generous support. Finally, but not least, I would like to thank our staff and student assistants for their hard work in making today's colloquium possible. I always say that we cannot run this institute without our staff. So thanks to Sean and all the student assistants today for their hard work. Once again, thank you so much for being here with us today, this morning, to our audience, and also our audience who are joining us virtually. I don't know where they are, but virtually, and also I very much look forward to our discussions today. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jisoo. Yes, today is our first in-person Hanmusu Colloquium. Of course, we're doing it hybrid as well, so there are people online. But it is so nice to see, actually, people sitting here. Our next speaker is Professor Emeritus Youngie Kim-Renaud, Professor Emeritus of Korean Language and Culture and International Affairs, previous chair of my department, East Asian Languages and Literatures. She is currently also the senior advisor to GWIX, and she is the founder of the annual Hanmusu Colloquium, and we couldn't have done this without her. So please, welcome. Thank you very much.
안녕하세요. Good morning. Dear speakers, other participants of the George Washington University's 30th Hanmusu Colloquium in the Korean Humanities, ladies and gentlemen. As the founder of the HNS Colloquium series at GW, I am immensely gratified by its longevity and continued vitality. Our topics have been wide-ranging and interdisciplinary, as our focus has been to show how the humanities matter in all aspects of life in Korean tradition and current affairs. We have always aimed at the highest possible academic and practical quality in terms of the speakers chosen and at the best minds of the Washington metropolitan area and even beyond as our audience. It has been our joy to bring together Korean and other perspectives on the same issues, where it would be whether it would be philosophy, architecture, or medicine. This year, we have chosen as our theme, fashion and clothing, one of three basic needs of all human needs. Needs of all human beings, clothes, food, and shelter. There is a saying in Korean, 옷이 날개다, which is literally translated as clothes are the wings, meaning good clothes can make a person look much better and take off in spirit and in society. In English, a somewhat related proverb is fine feathers make fine birds. Everyone knows, though, not all fancy clothing will make anyone look good or right if inappropriate for the weather or for the occasion, or even the body and behavior. In traditional Korea, as in many other cultures, costumes signify the status of the people at a particular point of their lives by their shapes, colors, and materials. Furthermore, a specific outfit was often part of a ritual. Being appropriately dressed meant showing respect and devotion to the persons involved and to the occasion. That is, Koreans dress to fulfill an important obligation of being a civilized person. As a result, clothing in traditional Korea expressed group identity in a highly stratified society. Haecho, a monk from the Korean kingdom of Shilla, 57 BCE to 935 CE, almost a 1,000-year dynasty, left us a famous diary, Wangho Chamchukgukjeon, the account of travels to 5 ancient Indian kingdoms in the 8th century. During his extraordinary travel up to the Middle East, in it he writes in wonderment that in an Arab nation, most likely to be Syria of today, where early Islam practiced democracy, the king and his subjects wore the same clothes. Even within the constraints of a highly stylized fashion, Koreans could still exercise creativity. However, authenticity and quality were most likely more sought rather than individual creativity. There were publicly recognizable symbols defining local aesthetics. These symbols were closely connected to common Korean beliefs related to philosophy and religion, love of man and nature, wishes and prayers, which thus dictated good taste. As society has continued to evolve and become more complex, identities became more individually defined, and people have wanted and enjoyed expressing their self-identity in a personal manner. As our world becomes more and more interconnected, we now see more commonalities across the cultures than ever before, as well as wider and wider differences within the same peoples. The very notion of appropriateness thus has been changing naturally. Since we are celebrating a major landmark of the Hanmusuk Colloquium, I might add a brief mention of its namesake, Hanmusuk, who was famous for a sense of fashion, which was both conforming and creative. Here is a quick look at some of our photos. I'll go through it very fast because there are lots of them. I tried to put a chronological into a chronological order. So in the inset, there is her photo when she was a high school girl. She actually started as a painter, and she's wearing her uniform. And they usually had a sailor colored, so we actually call the sailor dress. And the later photo is in 1950, where she's wearing Yangjang, Western style clothes. Oh, so, and here's her photo with a traditional Korean dress. And then, depending on the occasion, she would wear a hat to go out. This is when she was interviewed by a Japanese NHK TV. She's wearing, of course, Korean dress in Japan. And again, she's wearing, I think, a Western dress here. Why is it staying in the middle? I think I know it. So she was wearing Yangjang when she was in a particular official capacity. This is in a magazine. She's having a talk with my sister, and with the Perbok at my home, visiting. Of course, she's wearing Korean dress. This is with another Nobel laureate, Kawabata Yasunari, at his home in Japan, in Kamakura. And at our home in Seoul, when Kawabata Yasunari came to Korea. And this is when she was attending a pen congress in Bled, Yugoslavia. And this is with our last princess, who is actually a Japanese. She married political marriage with our last prince. And with John Updike at our home, here she was not wearing Korean dress because actually she had been injured, so she had to wear, she looks very stiff here, but she was wearing a Western dress. This is when she won an award, supposed to be Hyunmo Yangcha Award, Good Mother, Good Wife Award, and she's wearing, usually this is a kind of court dress which normal people couldn't wear, except at special occasions such as big birthdays or weddings. And this was an award ceremony, so she's wearing this kind of dress. Ooh. This is a famous Romanian writer, Gheorghiu, who wrote 25th Hour, at our home. Maybe this. Okay, this is with another Soul Bello in Jerusalem. She's wearing Western dress. This is her home dress. And she was wearing always a kind of very comfortable muumuu-like long dress at home. This is when she was giving a lecture at GW. And this is when she was giving a lecture at Harvard. And this is, believe it or not, it was at her 50th wedding anniversary. She looked very young to the last minute. So this is the end of my talk, and today's colloquium and the concurrent exhibition on the evolution of Korean fashion at the nearby GW Textile Museum demonstrate how interesting new identities can be expressed by creators, wearers, not to be missed, observers of Korean fashion. I know you will find them interesting, enriching, and thought-provoking. And I wish you all a wonderfully fashionable day.
Thank you very much, Kyunghee. The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, right? In terms of class, fashion, sophistication, very much like mother, like daughter. Now, onto our presentation. Our first presenter is Lee Talbot. He joined the Textile Museum as a curator in 2007. He specializes in East Asian textile history. He is also a lecturer with GW's Art History program. Most recently, Talbot curated the exhibition Vanishing Traditions, Textiles and Treasures from Southwest China. Talbot also was previously a curator at the Cheongyang Embroidery Museum in Seoul, Korea. He is completing his doctoral dissertation on Korean textiles and costumes history at Bard. Please welcome Lee.
All right, thanks very much, Immanuel. All of us at the museum are very grateful to you, to the Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures, the Institute for Korean Studies for partnering with us on this event. So this 30th Hanmusu Colloquium, as we mentioned, is the first in the series to focus on textiles. And in our museum's 97-year history, this is the first time that we have focused on Korea. And of course, now more than ever, Korean fashion is a timely topic. Increasingly in the 21st century, South Korea is receiving global attention for the so-called Hallyu, the Korean wave. The success of K-pop, K-cinema, K-beauty, all of these have stimulated international interest in Korean fashion. From the traditional clothing that we see in the Saguk, the TV drama set in historical times, all the way up to the latest styles worn by K-pop idols. So a project of this scope with multiple museum and private lenders requires several years of planning. And after several delays, and most significantly the pandemic, we're thrilled that we finally have the exhibition on view in our galleries. And this is all thanks to the efforts of our museum staff and individuals, including Dr. Yongyang Chung, who was a special advisor, as well as a lender and donor for the exhibition. And here we are together on a visit that she arranged to the Lee Sung-bong studio in 2019. Also, graduate assistants Eugene Che and Nam-hyun Kim have provided invaluable help in research and planning. So the exhibition introduces Hanbok, which of course is a collective term referring to various types of traditional Korean clothing. It explores how Hanbok and Korean clothing in general have changed with Korea's socio-economic changes since the late 19th century. And it explores how traditions such as Hanbok and pojagi serve as a springboard for new expression in Korean fashion. So the Hanmusu Colloquium focuses on humanities, and among the various fields in the humanities, fashion is an extremely rich subject. Fashion is a visual expression of society and its values, and as society and its values change, fashion also changes. Fashion is our most direct visual expression of our identities, and as people change and our identities change, their fashion choices also change. So the exhibition and many of the ideas that we'll hear today challenge long-standing Eurocentric perspectives that equate fashion with Western modernity. Recently, we've seen a pivot in the ways that scholars define and conceptualize fashion, particularly through approaches from material culture studies, post-colonial studies, anthropology, and other disciplines. So the exhibition and today's presentations respond to recent calls for scholars to provide a more inclusive global history of fashion. So the exhibition is bookmarked in time with Koreans presenting themselves to the world through fashion in 1893 and in 2022. And the presentations today will roughly follow the historical chronology of the exhibition and provide more in-depth explorations of some of the exhibition's main themes. So as Immanuel pointed out, some of the oldest objects in the exhibition were chosen and sent by the Korean royal court for display in the World's Columbian Exposition, held in Chicago in 1893. So in the late 19th century, before airplanes, TV, the internet, World's fairs were the primary venue for nations to present themselves to the world. They were popular and they were an effective medium of mass communication. Just for example, an estimated 1 in 6 Americans attended the Chicago World's Fair. So it was a great success. This was Korea's first participation in a World's Fair. And at a time when the nation's sovereignty was increasingly threatened, the fair offered the Korean government the opportunity to positively introduce Korea, its people, and its culture to a large global audience. After the fair, many of the objects from the Korean pavilion went into storage at the Field Museum in Chicago. And some of these objects were displayed in Korea in 1993 for the Daejeon Expo. But for our exhibition, it's the first time that they have been on view in the USA since the World's Fair in 1893. So with displays like this, the Korean pavilion introduced the people of Korea through Hanbok. And of course, Korean women have worn these basic garment forms for hundreds of years. And this has led to a widespread misconception of Hanbok as being timeless and unchanging. But in the exhibition, we explain that in fact, styles change continuously with fashion. For example, in the early Joseon period, jogori, the upper garments extended to the waist and had relatively wide sleeves. But throughout the 18th and 19th century, they became shorter and the sleeves narrower. But as we see here in the late 19th century, the fashion for short jogori reached its ultimate expression. Like any shorter, and it could not function as a jacket. Clothing was also the most prominent visual expression, a marker of identity in Joseon Korea. And the colors, the materials, the patterning of this outfit, they all identified the wearer as high status or Yangban. Even more explicit as identity markers were the clothing worn by court officials who wore rank badges on the front and back of their robes to communicate their precise position in the government hierarchy. So the exhibition explains that according to the teachings of Neo-Confucianism, which was the state philosophy during the Joseon dynasty, the wearing of clothing appropriate for rank, occasion, season, was a primary expression of ye, which is propriety, courtesy, and such. And this was a fundamental principle upholding social and cosmic order. So maintaining proper appearance was a moral obligation. And this idea still has some currency in Korea today. In 1893, Korean dress was on the cusp of great transformation, and the next section of the exhibition explores changes in Korean clothing that accompanied a series of clothing reform edicts issued from 1895 to 1900. So the exhibition, for example, traces the demise of these wide sleeve robes, the ascent of narrow-sleeved durumagi as the most common form for Koreans, male and female. With these two remarkable hats, they're both hand-woven from horsehair. We see the transition from gat, the traditional wide-brimmed hats, to Western-style hats for men. And so while some Koreans were adopting Western dress, Hanbok also was changing. We see the incorporation of new clothing forms from abroad, such as magoja, like you see on this side, which fastened with buttons instead of the traditional sashes. And so today, Jungtaek Lee will be giving us insight into various other fashion changes through the first half of the 20th century, and this not so linear transformation from Hanbok to Yangbok, or Western fashion. So the next floor of the exhibition looks at post-Korean War period. So as the majority of Koreans adopted Western-styled clothing through the 50s and 60s, pioneering designers such as Kim-Renaud and Andre Kim helped to introduce and popularize the latest international fashions. And we still see the influence of traditional Korean design, however, such as the sekdong stripes that we see on the Kim-Renaud dress, and on the Andre Kim, we see Joseon Dynasty rank badges and Shilla Dynasty gold crowns in the shape of antlers. On loan from the Daegu National Museum are several garments by Kyunghee, who in the 1990s became one of the first Korean designers to present a collection on the Paris runways. And she often reconfigured hanbok for contemporary international consumers. For example, her iconic Clothes of the Wind, the red garment that you see there, it was based on traditional chima or skirts, but it was worn without a chogori. And that scandalized many hanbok purists, but it was highly regarded by French fashion critics. The durumagi that we see here was created as part of a set for world leaders to wear at the APEC summit held in Busan in 2005. So today, Kyunghee Pyun will be talking more about this intersectionality of modern fashion and national identity. Today, Korea's most well-known and internationally successful fashion designers is Lee Sang-bong. And we typically don't see explicit references to hanbok forms and construction in Lee's designs, but as we'll be hearing today from Lee's daughter, Nana Lee, he often re-envisions various aspects of traditional Korean culture with a cosmopolitan sensibility. And today, a new generation of designers has a strong focus on sustainability and social justice. This quilted jacket is by the fashion brand Sunday School. Many Sunday School garments are small batch produced in Korean workshops that specifically employ single parents. The wrapping cloths that you see on the back are by designer Kim Danha, whose sustainable fashion brand Danha gives traditional Korean textiles and patterns an eco-friendly twist. The fabric that we see here is made from recycled plastic bottles, and it was used to make the costumes worn by Blackpink for the video How You Like That, so which propelled Danha's international popularity. Similarly, the patronage of K-pop idols, followed by millions of stans worldwide, has bolstered the success of designers such as Kim Young-jin, Hwang Yi-soo, who have launched successful brands specializing in easy-to-wear interpretations of historical styles. So simplified hanbok like these have become increasingly fashionable in recent years, and K-pop stars, young Koreans, the Korean diaspora, wear modernized hanbok as fashion statements that reaffirm their national identity. The Korean government also has encouraged the wearing of hanbok. October 21st has been designated as Hanbok Day, and throughout the year, Koreans and international visitors alike are encouraged to wear and take photos of themselves in hanbok when visiting heritage sites. So here we see hanbok-style school uniforms. These are created as part of a joint project between the Korean Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, and the Ministry of Education that encourages schools to switch from Western to Korean styles. And then the final section of the exhibition explores the tremendous international success of Korean popular culture in the 21st century. Costumes from K-dramas and a digital display of K-pop videos. And we see that Korean movies, TV shows, music videos, these play a key role in promoting Korean products and designers internationally. The exhibition finishes with a screen showing the latest South Korean street styles. Young Koreans have developed a distinct fashion culture that intermingles global and local trends, brands, and cultural references to create these unique statements of identity. And these fashions often challenge longstanding Korean conventions of dress and behavior. And today we'll be hearing more about street fashions from Michael Hurt. So the exhibition shows how far Korea has come from the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, when the Joseon government sought to introduce a culture and clothing tradition that was completely unfamiliar to most people in the West at the time. Today, with the Korean wave heightening international interest and social media providing immediate access and virtual community, Korean fashions are widely observed, admired, and emulated across the world. So with current interest in Korea, we've had exceptionally high visitorship and demand for tours from schools and community groups. Our Korean-themed Family Day in September, planned in cooperation with the Korean Cultural Center in DC, brought more than 2,000 people to the museum in one day for musical and dance performances, art activities, and exhibition tours. Also, thanks to the Korean Cultural Center, we have an ongoing this hanbok try-on station, which you can enjoy this afternoon when you visit the museum. We had 2 sold-out workshops sponsored by the Solar One Foundation This provided the opportunity for visitors to learn about traditional Korean embroidery and patchwork from experts. And of course, today we have the chance to learn more about Korean fashion history from an international roster of distinguished speakers. So we're excited and honored that this exhibition project has provided the opportunity to learn about and engage with Korean culture through the lens of fashion, past and present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee, for that introduction to the exhibition. Now, all of you must go and check it out. Otherwise, you'd be missing out. All right, international distinguished speaker indeed. Our next speaker is from England, or flew in from England, sorry. Jungtaek Lee is a director of London Hanbok, a contemporary Hanbok brand, and postdoctoral researcher working on Korean fashion history. He received a PhD in the Department of History and Art and Archaeology at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, where he focused on the colonial modernity of Korean dress change during the late 19th and early 20th century. Please welcome me, Jungtaek Lee.
Good morning. 안녕하세요. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. It's my honor to be invited in this wonderful Hanbok Colloquium. I must say thank you to Lee Talbot and his team for the exhibition. It has been postponed, but it's really nice to see the exhibition with this the Colloquium. And also thanks to the university and the Korea Foundation and with the legacy that was made for this occasion possible for the last 30 years. I must say this presentation and the script is prepared based on my PhD, and I conducted my PhD at SOAS, which was all about the Korean fashion, Korean dress, its history, especially during the early 20th century. So I wondered about whether the Hanbok can be called fashion, and that was my key theme. And let's start with this sort of the photograph. It's taken by Lee Moong-sik, who is well known for his realism photograph as a pioneer in Korea. It shows the group of women wearing the Western style clothes on the right, and it's called the Yangbok, and the woman in the Korean traditional costume or Hanbok in front. They are walking on the pavement in front of the Middle-Pa department store in one of the fashion retail street, Myeongdong in Seoul, taken in early summer of 1956. One may easily perceive the printed A-line one-piece dress holding the parasols and handbags as fashion, but can one also view the woman in Hanbok appearance as fashion in Korea? So that was my question, and she is wearing a well-made Hanbok and a fine assembly fabric weighted button on the jacket rather than using the traditional fastening strap. The moment captured by the photographer implies the question that this talk raises on the transitional period of dress practice change and its relation to modern fashion in Korea. So the structural change from wearing Hanbok to Yangbok is commonly seen as the transition in which modern fashion emerged in Korea from the late 19th century, replacing the traditional non-Western Korean dress with modern Muslims. However, when we examine these actual cases of Korean sartorial practice, this linear and dichotomous perspective becomes problematic. And following the Treaty of Kama Island and signed with Imperial Japan in 1876, Korea gradually opened its door to Japan and foreign countries and began to interact with neighboring and Western powers in terms of trade, politics until the Japanese annexation of 1910. And this was reflective of the international relations and geopolitical tensions of the time in East Asia. Throughout the so-called the opening port era and Daehan Korean Empire, and consequently the Korean modernization in the early 20th century and colonial period from 1910 to 45, Korea was exposed to foreigners in Western Ghat alongside a modernized Western material culture. This resulted in unfamiliar but inevitable experiences of sartorial encounters, namely between two different types of clothing, Hanbok and Yangbok, through their appearances and dress bodies. The so-called dual ways of dressing from Hanbok to Yangbok is mainly indicated in describing the sartorialship during this time. For instance, written in many Korean dress history books, such as by Yu Hee-kyung, Munja, Kobuja, to name a few. This viewpoint simply claims that people's dressing practice changed from the wearing traditional Korean clothing to modern Western clothing, and considers the period as having a dual sartorial structure, either traditional Hanbok or modern Yangbok. This limited view perhaps comes from the internalized Western-centric account of fashion. And in the Western fashion scholarship, as for the origin of fashion, it has often been understood as a historically and geographically specific system for the production and organization of dress. For instance, the account from James Labour or Quentin Bell. The problem lies in the way in which the conditions of fashion has been tied to Western systems of dress as an aspect of Western modernity. Such a premise may dismiss the possibility of fashion in a non-Western context, and its countries like Korea and Korean Hanbok. When discussing emergence of modern fashion in non-Western societies, where indigenous dress began to meet with Western dress, and more balanced views on fashion are therefore required. Now, the Anglophone field of broader non-Western fashion studies is concerned with the clothing as garment and its related system of production and consumption with the local context. For instance, accounts from John Archer, Jennifer Craig. In this regard, the studying fashion in East Asian contexts, such as Annie Barlow and Anthony Finney and Tony Slade, also Kyunghee, suggests that the fashion is not necessarily confined to historically and geographically specific system, event, dynamic, or object. As Jan Craig argued that fashion should not be defined as exclusively the preserve of the culture of modernity, but other systems of fashion should be recognized and examined in their own terms. Recent Korean studies, where Korean dress and fashion scholarship are looking at this protein time of the sartorial change, has then provided some developing views on the period, along with the advancements of the social and cultural studies on the modern and colonial time. For instance, the studies from Lee Kyung-hee, Jo Hee-jun, Lee Min-jung, and Kim Min-ja are relevant. And in my presentation, the advent of modern fashion in Korea should not be limited to Western style of dress, but changes in Korean style can be also included and negotiated. Situated in the field of non-Western fashion studies, my study also tries to bridge this text in decentralizing Eurocentric notions of fashion. Joanne Jisoo once claimed in her book, The Fashion Body, that the condition of fashion in the West relies upon three criteria: social mobility, relations of production and consumption, and regular and systematic change of dress. However, the condition of fashion doesn't need to be Western specific and can be applied differently to other non-Western societies, where the fashions can emerge in vernacular context of local conditions and through social cultural backgrounds. Hence, critically interpreting diverse sources of object, image, and text gleaned from the modern and colonial period of Korea, the framework of production, mediation, and consumption is employed to counter the Western-centric notions of fashion and to better examine its non-linear transition of dress and fashion change in Korea with a holistic lens into the formative period and processual steps. And this approach and the cases and case studies taken from the Korea's past will build up a large picture of the time, and especially the rise of modern Korean fashion that materialize through not only Yangbok but also Hanbok. And it will illustrate how the seeming dichotomy between the two dress systems was impacted by diversity and integrally developed in relation to the modern fashion and local modernities of Korea. Now, looking at the production side, the textile manufacturing in Korea had been done by hand in the home until the end of the 19th century. And it began to modernize with the weaving department, Jikjogu, was established in 1884. In the 90s, several textile factories were established, such as the Great Joseon Spinning Company, and also the Hahn Spinning Joint Invest Company in 1899. And under Japanese rule, economic historians such as Kwon states that while Western capital and communities encroached on the traditional economic structure of agriculture and cottage industries, the Korean textiles industry was among the most heavily impacted by the foreign powers. For instance, the cotton textiles used in Korea were mostly imported from Britain until 1894. Then after 1905, Japanese cotton textiles fully replaced British ones. And in response to the growing market power of the Japanese nationalist elites and the capitalists began to support the large-scale Korean textiles manufacturing in the city areas. Notably, the Gyeongsang Textile Manufacturing Incorporated was established in 1919 with the Korean capital and a sum of 1 million won. After learning that the about 27 million won was spent yearly on Japanese cotton floors, the founder Kim Sung-soo prepared the capital fund according to the one man, one stock policy. And rather than asking for the money for the handful of wealthy people in the hope that this company could become a national manufacturer. So this is a picture for the Gyeongsang Textile Manufacturing Incorporated. And by this competition and modern textile production in the colonial condition, it eventually provided machine-produced fabrics to be widely used in dressmaking and facilitate modern fashion trends due to their increased quantity and reasonable prices in the market. So to examine the part, this article featured in the Joseon Ilbo newspaper in 1928. The title shows this year's autumn prices highlight a 10% decline of textile prices. The kinds of textiles shown vary with as many as 32 different types of fabrics, from silk and satin to linen and cotton to lamy and hand. The variety of fabrics evinces that Koreans were given many options in their selection of textiles for dressmaking at the time. Among the fabrics traditionally used for hanbok is silk cloth, myeongju, and lam moji were priced according to their quality: special, high, medium, and low. This indicates that a choice could be made depending on the consumer's financial conditions. Of the 47 items with the classified quality, the average price was 59 jeon, including the Western silk fabric Soyang Ladan, priced at 50 jeon, and Japanese silk fabric Ilbon Ladan, priced at 30 jeon. This demonstrates the availability of Western and Japanese textiles in the Korean market. And indeed, the Japanese silk fabric was provided at a competitive price, which would have allowed many Koreans to use Japanese textiles irrespective of nationalist sentiment. So considering the colonial circumstances in which Korean and Japanese textiles companies competed with each other, purchasing the domestically produced Korean goods was well regarded by Koreans as one of the way practicing the patriotism and the colonial rule. Yet relatively low-priced Japanese textiles became a tempting commodity to needy Korean consumers or people wanting to be economical in their household expenses. Other than this predicament, given the increased availability of fabrics for making hanbok in their household, Korean dress was being made in a variety of styles based on varied textures and colors of fabrics. This gradually expanded such choices in making hanbok and would have allowed for new styles to come into fashion more feasibly. Eventually, the various textiles available in the market impacted on the design of Korean dress during this time. In order to examine the traces of modernity in actual hanbok garments, an object-based examination was conducted on the early 20th century hanbok collection of the Sungkyunkwan University, which was launched by the Daejeon St. Mary's and Girls High School. The almost 300 men's and women's hanbok objects were originally collected in Seoul and Daejeon areas prior to the 1990s and donated to the school and then later loaned to the university for further research. Among these objects in the collection, many empirical details of the hanbok from the colonial period clearly indicate modern changes to the clothing. Based on the collection examined, it is evident that a great variety of textiles and colors were used to make hanbok during this time, and as in the photographs. The object exemplified that clothes was made in range of fabrics such as silk brocade, cotton calico, hemp linen, and synthetic silk rayon, with varied color tones. Among them, one hanbok jacket or choguri demonstrates the use of Japanese textile made in Hahn time. A thin silk fabric of the most basic plain Japanese weaves, patterned with peony. Professor Joseon and Hasawa Lisa stated that the Japanese influence on hanbok can also be found in its use of different pattern styles that Korean dress had not previously used, with some the local adaptations such as the preference for flower patterns over stripes and large size. With this increased availability of various fabrics, hanbok now came in a variety of textiles, and thus new colors and patterns emerged in Korean dress during the period, as these certain flavor choices according to Korean taste. Now, looking at this example, we dress as an asset medium for the expression of ideas, identity, desires, and social strata. The hanbok reflects a sense of hybrid modernity in its varying individual designs. This slide, this picture shows a woman's blue overcoat lined in the red with yellow dye. The use of bright color combination in the exterior clothes and lining, here blue and red, can be also found in colors of the ceremonial Korean costume. And first of yin and yang as a symbol of harmony. Yet the lining of this jurumagi shows rather unfamiliar new method of dyeing using a yellow pigment with a fluid pattern, including that fabric was probably imported goods from Japan or elsewhere. Thus, while keeping with these traditional color combinations and structural form, this Korean dress also features a hidden modern twist or alterations with inner lining, expressing the wearer's taste for the maker's creativity, as well as a kind of hybridity in the sartorial object. Furthermore, the wearer's identity is inscribed in Korean Ihengda on the right corner, stitched by a modern sewing machine over the geometric designs of an inner pocket. So mixed with this Western style inner pocket and this hanbok overcoat, the machine stitched name clearly shows who owns the jurumagi and the values of clothing as a means of expressing one's status and identity. The value of the clothing as a means of judging from the quality of the fabric and the dyeing method, the owner would have been a fashion conscious figure from an opulent background. Now, looking at the mediation part, fashion as an aspect of social character was largely communicated through the modern print media that was emerged in the late 19th century Korea. The first newspaper was Hansong Sunbo in 1883, and also followed by the Hansong Chubo in 1886, and Mail Shinbo published in 1910 by the Japanese government of Korea, Japanese bulletin during that time. And after the March 1st independence movement, those newspapers, namely the 조선일보, 동아일보, and 시사신문, and many magazines, 삼천리오, 별공간 was published during the 1920s and 30s. So the daily and seasonal use of fashion and textiles was introduced through written text and visual images in the newspapers. And it increased the consumer demands by mediating fashion in Korea to a general audience. To present one detailed case study in particular, the 동아일보 newspaper with section home or 가정 began discussing fashion or trend or 유행 from 1924, and even introduced the Paris fashion during the 1930s. In fact, it published a series of 4 fashion reports between August and September in 1934. So looking at the article on the 22nd of August in 1934, the newspaper featured a section introducing the new fall fashion from Paris as the first article of the series. Entitled "In Madame," the heading read "The new fall fashion." The first, the women's Yangbok, complicated styles, purplish brown colors, and rough woven fabrics to come. Beginning with this comment, beginning with the comment on the colors of women's Yangbok, in the first section of this article, it goes on to differentiate between the complexion and the physique of the Oriental people of Dongyang Injong, including Korean women, in comparison to that of Western women. And it advises Koreans to use black, white, and dark blue colors to avoid choosing the wrong colors for Yangbok. An internalized sense of racial differentiation is evident in this article, with the Korean writer suggesting alternatives and the best colors for the Korean readers. This demonstrates an awareness of the different traits of clothing color chosen by wearers. It tries to find out the best suitable fit for themselves rather than just imitate the fashion from the West. And the following session is subtitled Color, Pitgal, and it reports that the roughly interwoven fabric mixed with the 2 or 3 colors will come. And this type of a new Western material would give much influence to Joseon clothes. So the writer also suggests a preference for white and black colors due to their practicality and propriety. And it is clear that the Western textiles tends not only Western textile trends not only influenced Hanbok in terms of material, but also the color code of white and black. And that was used by Koreans during the time, which matched the imported Western color scheme. And this can be seen as a sort of reflecting and creating a sense of modernity in color code. The last section of the article, sample of Gyeongbon, introduces the 3 styles of women's Yangbok, which are also illustrated on the left. The title "Madame" is printed with an illustration of a traditional style woman wearing hanbok, a jogger jacket and chima skirt with a taegungmak fan in her hand, in her left hand, and she is leaning on a pillar with a wind bell hanging from the Korean style eaves. And this may represent a stark contrast with the sample illustration of the 3 Western style women on the left. Now, the Colonial key argues that such a binary opposition was reinforced by colonial discourses in visual culture of the Japanese rule. And that is the colonial government's visual propaganda categorized Koreans as the colonized traditional, and this lack of modernity was used to legitimize the Japanese regime. Images of Korean Hanbok was exploited in this way, and the critique of colonial visual propaganda can be understood in one sense. But I would argue that one should also further liberate the status of Hanbok in a way that enables the traditional Korean dress to move towards the possibility of fashion in Hanbok. So the article concludes by stating that it will introduce later women's accessories and fall seasons Joseon clothes, Joseon haul. And the promised article on Joseon clothes, mainly introducing the season's new fabric for women's Hanbok skirt, came in the 4th article in the series. This indicates that the Joseon Korean style clothes or Hanbok were treated as a separate field of fashion, demonstrating that the fashion in Korea at this time was understood and practiced not only with Western style Yangbok clothing, but also with Korean Hanbok clothing. The Hanbok was not necessarily traditional to Korean consumers, but rather a continuing form of dress that Korean people regarded as an existing domain of attire, along with the new imported Western style. So both Hanbok and Yangbok clothing then provide fashionable choices for Koreans, depending on their individual taste, identities, and socio-economic classes and circumstances. And looking at the 4th article in the Donghwa on 4th of September in 1934, is titled "New Fall Fashion, the 4th," and features the women's skirt fabrics. It is particularly interesting in the way that it reports on Hanbok fabric trends for senior or new women. And the first part translates saying, for a while, intricate pattern and complex colors have been in fashion, but now by looking at generally at senior new women, choices, numerous choices, there is a tendency to choose big patterns, simple and quiet tones from among the complicated colors as much as possible. So this illustrates that the new women in Korea were the key group to pay attention to in terms of fashion trends. And they also dressed in hanbok. The style and fashion of the new women's hanbok was mainly about changes in the pattern and colors of the fabrics. The article then goes to discuss color. It clearly acknowledges the personal preference, agreeing that it cannot be said which one is good color. This implies that individual consumers' taste in color should be considered and respected. And to some extent, fashion articles in the print media facilitate the Korean women in developing their own styles and tastes in the consumption of fashion. The reports but also anticipate the green, brown, and purple would be common fashionable colors in general. And the clothes woven with noble Western colors would be plotted in the street this autumn, and acting as a sort of the fashion forecast. So the fashion reports does observe the trends and preference of the masses of Korea that depends on the individual style and the local sort of the context of the new image, as well as predicting and reporting what will be in fashion with influences from the outer world. So here the dichotomy between the Western and non-Western fashion becomes not necessarily contested and divided, but rather related and complemented. So the article finally closes by listing the prices of 6 new textiles for making a piece of hanbok skirt ranging from 3160 jeon to 29 won. The inclusion of details about this season's new fabrics and their prices is worth noting, because these fabrics would be used for home dressmaking, and a woman's selection of fabric design and color was meaningful as it indicates the home dressmakers and wearers' knowledge of fashion trends. Hence, mass-produced textile consumption and domestic production of clothing closely connected fashion across Korea to a larger world, so reflecting both global trend and local fashion with a particular reference to and nuances of the time in Korea. Lastly, looking at the consumption size, well, the Shinmyeongjik states that under the colonial capitalist regime, the expanding phenomenon of shop windows displaying their wealth enticed Korean consumers, but for them, it also gave rise to both desire and anxiety about the goods they wanted to consume. The colonial economic hardship did not seem to entirely limit modern individuals' sense of being consumers and awareness of their taste for beauty and fashion. Followed by that, the Kyunghee also cites that Shinyeosong or Nilman or modern girl as a key player in women's modernization and consumption practice in the early 20th century. And this group of women who received a modern education in Korea and often studied abroad in Japan or elsewhere was often fashion conscious figures and adopted new fashion more quickly than other people in Korea. So much so that their appearance was often regarded as a modern spectacle in the city of Gyeongsang, despite some satirical criticism by the press. So looking at, the fashion practice in colonial modern Korea also paradoxically similar to the short-term prevalence observation of conspicuous consumption in American society, in particular the city of Chicago in the 1890s. And in his account, the main activity of the leisure class was the conspicuous consumption, defined as the use of money or other resources like fashion to gain a high social status. And prevalence analysis suggests that the further subjugation of women through the display of housewives as a trophy to demonstrate a male status. So now looking at this photograph, the coffee shop at the Joseon Hotel built in Sogong, North Korea, as a Western style hotel in 1914, was one main spot in the city of Joseon, where people who were taking advantage of their leisure time went to display their classy appearance. Their conspicuous consumption seems to have stood out in unflattering light against the backdrop of the many misery for many in colonial Korea. Yet, in a way, these fashionable members of the leisure class initiated the modern fashion in colonial Korea. And as such, they were among the country's the moderns. And specifically, you can look at the lady dressed in the sort of Western style, who is the famous dancer, Korean dancer, Kyunghee, and she's wrapped up in a fox fur muffler with a cap over her short hair and holding a handbag, which was the style of the fashion in the 1930s. With her celebrity status, she indeed played a part in mediating Western style fashion at the time. And such a woman was not simply a trophy to her husband, but a style leader in her own right, flaunting her fashionability through conspicuous leisure, but as a working woman of a professional modern dancer. So Babylon's accounts of the late 19th century America exposed access in the consumption of fashion, but his examination of the changes in style and dress is limited. And the agency and experience of pleasure in sartorial practice does not come through in such interpretation. As the plurality of voices observed here is obscure, it's not entirely erased. And Elizabeth Wilson famously claimed that the Babylon started the oddity of fashion a few times, and in his architectural work, there was no place for the irrational or the non-infinite, and seeing the ledger as an absurd in itself. So Babylon's analysis is thus oversimplified and over-deterministic, and granting no role to contradiction, nor to the possibilities of pleasure and agency in social matters, including fashion. So Korean women's ability to use fashion to inhabit and exhibit the new identities pushes beyond the limits of Babylon's analysis, as demonstrated by the well-dressed Joseon. And Korean women's fashion was not limited to the Western style here again. So use of the Hanbok and the mixed style of Korean dress with the Western accessories was also regarded as fashionable in colonial in Korea. In this article from the 1928 Joseon newspaper, a husband complains about his wife taking 3 hours to get ready to go to the cinema. Replying to her nagging, to her husband's nagging, she argues that she needs to be meticulous in applying her makeup to knock out at a dark place like the theater, which makes the illuminating her face more brighter. And she endures the long hours of preparation, by that enjoys the pleasure of fashioning herself before going out, whether she can be seen on their way to the cinema or during the film. Meanwhile, in Western suit and hair on the right, and displaying his pocket watch, the man has the air of the modern boy. The woman styles her hair sitting in front of the mirror at the dressing table, wearing what appears to a Western style undergarment. For her makeup, she needs several basins of water, and all her makeup pieces are visible around her on the floor. And her silk stocking and the back are also laid on the floor. And significantly, her modernized hanbok, jacket, and skirt are hanging on the wall nearby. So putting the article's sarcastic take on white effective adornment aside, her style fashioning presents a genuinely pleasurable means for the modern woman to project her style and taste and her identity. Going out with her husband for leisure was a chance to be commissioned by anonymous urban gauges in a way of expressing her fashion in the Hanbok scarf with the Western accessories. Fashion was indeed a form of communication between the individual and the collective, enabling the city dwellers to publicly exalt their identities in the modern category of Korea. The changeability and kinds of style in popular fashion became a common topic for the discussion in high society of Korea during the 1930s. For instance, taken from the magazine Samcheonli in January 1937, the actress and Madame Sook commented on ladies and gentlemen's style in the town, reviewing the styles worn by various public figures from the fields of journalism, business, film, music, and literature. This article features fashionable figures in the mid-30s and discussed the concern with style and fashion, indicating how modern fashion has taken roots in Joseon. And many modern individuals were said to be experimenting with Western styles and new modern trends, but it is notable that the Korean Hanbok style was remained a respected and fashionable style. So regarding three female journalists from the 동아일보, Bookcase comments like this. And she comments on Hahn, she comments on Kim-Renaud, spectacle cherubism. She's saying it's a born beauty and has a pretty and attractive appearance from behind. So she is suited either to Western Ghat or to this frugal look, dressed in white jugglery and black chima. Or she is even suited to the classical lady, wearing her hair in a bun, with a long hanbok skirt ending at the heel, and finished in yellow traditional blue. She is probably the number one among women journalists. So at first, along with the Yangbok style and hanbok style of the schoolgirl look and the fast lady look were considered as fashionable. And this shows that during the transitional phase of the fashion period, both Korean and Western style were employed in modern fashion. This coexistence of hanbok and yangbok in modern Korean fashion was chosen by an individual depending on one's sartorial identity. And this is indeed observed in a photo montage taken from the 1929 magazine Talbot. During the people on the street of mentioning various styles of hanbok and yangbok style. And fashion during the colonial period was hybrid, a state in which Korean soca is floating regardless of the arbitrary separation between hanbok and yangbok. They were both consumed interchangeably and creatively in order to prevent fashionable individuals structurally belonging to time. So to conclude, this talk has shown some nuanced understanding of the structural tension between hanbok and yangbok in modern Korea. But the binary opposition between the traditional long contemporary dress and modern Western dress has come under scrutiny. Reflecting the modern ironies of time and the sensibilities of Korean society, the examination of modern dressing has proved that the transition from hanbok to yangbok was not linear. When looking at the actual cases in the conditions of production, mediation, and consumption, the current situation. The very dichotomy of hanbok and yangbok really was represented to the colonial discourse by the Eurocentric notions of fashion, and forget or dismiss the protein nature of the structural transition. But as this book has illustrated, in reality, they were very much intermingled and interwoven. Both hanbok and yangbok constitute modern fashion in Korea, and in fact, the varying model of fashion styles played an inevitable role in the rise of modern fashion in the century of time, reflecting the vernacular context. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, continuing on. Next, we have Kyunghee Pyun, who is an associate professor of art history at the Fashion Institute of Technology, State University of New York. Her scholarship focuses on history of collecting, the reception of Asian art, the diaspora of Asian artists, and Asian American visual culture, including dress history. She has edited Fashion, Identity, Power in Modern Asia, which discusses modernized dress in the early 20th century. Please join me in welcoming Kyunghee Pyun. Can you speak
And it's already, we are a bit running late, right? It's already 10:20. So I try to read my presentation rather swiftly so that you can have more time to the break time. So this lecture starts with a pop quiz. So I prepared this photograph because I'm coming to Washington, D.C. So do you recognize when the period is? Do you see the U.S. president here?
Yes.
Yeah, who's this?
George W. Bush.
George W. Bush. So when was it?
2005.
early 2000. Oh, even 2005. That is the correct answer. So this is a, yeah.
It's in the picture in the museum.
Oh, yes, good point. There is a reason why I brought this photograph, right? So this is APEC Summit at Jeju Island in 2005. So President Bush and is it Hu Jintao? You know, like the long gun politicians show up in durumagi, right? Korean hanbok dress, and this is the focus of today. You know, globalizing Korean fashion. It became so globalized that all the political leaders showed up here. And who designed this durumagi? Oh, you forgot. It's coming up. It's okay, but still very good. So, this lecture starts with the emergence of Korean fashion in the post-Korean War era and shows how intersectionality of modern fashion and national identity is applied to construction of a fashion system through print media, runway shows, and fashion designers. Korea's rapid economic growth in the 1970s resulted garment and textile export to a global market. Subsequently, boutique-based fashion system expanded to ready-to-wear industry for domestic consumption. In the 21st century, Korean fashion has become more visible and influential beyond the runway and street fashion. Rise of popular culture in music, film, and multimedia enabled Korean fashion to exert its creativity, hybridity, dynamism, and adaptability to global audiences. Korean fashion has brought much attention to the global audiences via popular culture known as Hallyu or Korean Wave. Along with the textile museums, Korean fashion from Royal Court to Runway, Victoria and Albert Museum in London hosts a large exhibition called Hallyu Korean Wave. Korean fashion designers, stylists, and theatrical costume designers have received much praise for their creative and innovative vision accompanied by meticulous research. In this lecture, I would like to talk about development of the Korean fashion system through high-end fashion on runway to clothes for ordinary people on the street from 1950s to the early 2000s. I hope Korean fashion can be featured in a more multidisciplinary way as we have experienced with the important fashion exhibition. Have you been to Met? This is Fashion, Impressionism, Modernity at the Metropolitan Museum in 2013, or American Quilt Exhibition at the Park Avenue Armory. So, the previous exhibition of Couture Korea, have you been to this show? Anybody? Okay, it was in San Francisco. So, in 2008, coincided with the rise of new hanbok, called Shinhanbok in Korean, movement. In the Textile Museum's exhibition this year, audiences are impressed by both types of Korean fashion. Yangjang, meaning Western style clothes for women, and hanbok. This is new hanbok. Works on display at the Textile Museum are carefully chosen to convey the crossover aesthetics between both categories, like Yangjang and hanbok. As someone who observed how the curatorial team, Lee Talbot and his colleagues, worked for several years on this show, I would like to praise their selection, especially the Field Museum Korean clothes from the 1893 the World Fair. I read about it, but I've never saw them in person, so it has a remarkable value. Anyhow, thank you, Lee. So I'm going to start chronologically, 1950s, the 60s, moving forward, and then 2000s, and I want to finish within a good time. So we started at 10:20. So after the Korean War was paused after the armistice in 1953, Korean government collaborated with the United States to restore normalcy, to boost the morale of the refugees who returned to Seoul, and to disseminate a propaganda of US cultural hegemony. Fashion shows and beauty pageants were organized from 1956. As in Japan, fashion shows and beauty pageants, including a swimsuit competition, were novelties for most Korean citizens. So usually how did they consume beauty pageants? There was no live TV broadcast back then. So through the print media, like Hanbok Ilbo was the major sponsor of these shows. Before the independence, Myeongdong was a commercial center crowded with fashionable people. One has to dress up to go shopping there. Nora-No and other emerging designers quickly adapted to high-end fashion boutique system by opening up stores as they came back to Seoul from the refugee during the Korean War. So do you recognize where they are? Have you been here? Pando Hotel, which is current Lotte Hotel, and it's on the rooftop area, and Nora-No's exhibition. But there is a theory or a statement that Choi Kyung-ja organized a fashion show as early as 1955. So I'm going back to Choi Kyung-ja over and over again, so I want you to remember her name. However, young and old people well responded to these new trends, and fashionable women flocked to tailoring boutiques in Myeongdong. There are other popular shopping streets in large cities like Busan and Daegu as well. So these are famous black and white photographs by professional photographers, Lee Moon-sik and Han Young-soo. And these are sort of street fashion, and they show American-style life realism photos. So do you see the striped jogori of a woman in the foreground, how fashionable she is? In the film called Jiokwa, Flower from the Hell, directed by Shin Sang-ho, famous director, audiences were shocked and immoral behavior of the femme fatale named Sonia. There are other characters, and the plot is Sonia and her boyfriend Young-sik and Young-sik's brother Dong-sik. They want to rob the U.S. military supplies, so criminal behavior. It's a melodrama, you have to see this. It's currently available on Korean Film Archive for free. If you go to YouTube, you can watch the whole thing with English subtitle. Very well made. As she was a companion to an American military officer, the character was shown in trendy dresses from the American magazines. It was this period when Choi Kyung-ja, remember? Choi Kyung-ja came back to Seoul from the refugee and established her sewing academy. Knowing international fashion trends was important, so she named her academy 국제복장학원. Have you ever heard of 국제복장학원? Yeah, Professor Kim-Renaud have heard of it. Me too. So it's called International Sewing Academy. Unlike a tailoring academy for men to learn how to make a menswear, Choi's Bukje Academy taught how to make a fashionable women's wear. There was the age of Yangjangjeom. Yangjangjeom means tailoring boutiques for women's wear. In the late 1950s, Choi's boutiques were making 50 to 60 overcoats a month, wintertime. Choi trained to be a classical musician at Musashino College of Music, and then attending Ochanomizu University to learn sewing and tailoring was extraordinary in many ways. Let me see whether it's right. As a couture designer, she combined the Korean tradition with high-end dressmaking. Her Cheongja dress, it's coming out. Her Cheongja dress, inspired by the Goryeo Celadon, is timeless. So you can see some of her major works collected here. And ordinary people did not wear these exquisite dresses, but read about them in print media. So I have to stop here and introduce this beautiful two twin dress. Do you see the yellow and the purple? And they are called, in Korean you can read, 묵꽃과 배추꽃. So 배추 is a napa cabbage. So do you see the napa cabbage color, right? And then the 묵꽃, I actually haven't seen 묵꽃, but it's like a reddish flower. So it's sort of, like a bellflower kind of color, so purple. And then her famous peacock dress, so from 1960s. So Cheongja dress is really impressive, isn't it? We don't have the Cheongja dress, but next time when we have a larger shows. But I want to mention something. So on the street side, the US aid economy had a huge impact on Korean people's lifestyle. As seen in the fashion show or beauty pageants, American films and magazines were strategically introduced to ordinary people in South Korea. Limited supplies of beauty products like lipsticks or fashion accessories like American nylon pantyhose or knit socks were popular items for imported products traded at the Namdaemun market. Have you been to Namdaemun market? Okay, a lot of you. So it was known for the trade of imported goods. Until the late 1960s, Korean female students wore skirt-based winter uniforms without stockings on the bare skin. On the streets, young women in trendy outfits were parading the street in boutique-tailored or homespun Yangjang dresses, while married women showed up in modernized hanbok design. It was popular to make hanbok out of velvet or tying the joguri with a brooch. That was a popular fashion. So I didn't bring any footages, but remember this title called Madame Freedom. Have you ever seen Madame Freedom? 자유부인. So this is another black and white melodrama movie from 1956. But if you see that footage in Korean Film Archive, the free movie on YouTube, you can see all kinds of hanbok dresses from 50s made in various textiles. But this is important. When you watch Madame Butterfly, she's working at a 양품점. 양품점 meaning boutique selling beauty supplies and fashion items like a blouse or handkerchief, not tailor-made, something you can buy by the size. And in it, you sometimes see advertisement of Max Factor Jr. Do you see this Amber, Max Factor Jr.? I mean, it's not exactly this advertisement, but the brand is shown in her workplace. So American products were popular back then. Expensive though. Nora-No's 색동 dress represents the mood of this period, fusion of modern and tradition. This spirit penetrates through the 20th century, and hanbok designer Lee Kyunghee later on worked on this kind of beautiful bridal gown using the parrot motif and dress style. So going back to 최경자. So Choi and her students created a foundation for high-end fashion show. They had an annual fashion show to grow and expand. And they showed their students' work. So these are groups of people in the International Fashion Show organized by Kyunghee. Okay, now I'm skipping to 1960s. Okay. So Choi also started a charming school to train fashion models. In this photo, you can see a young designer, Andre Kim. Do you recognize Andre Kim? Okay, a lot of people now recognize Andre Kim. So when he was young, 1963, he sees a famous model named Jo Hera. So they are taking pictures together. And you can see the fashion show advertisement from 1953. And then I want you to pay attention to the bottom. This is a popular synthetic textiles maker, manufacturer as a sponsor. And then you can see the runway scene. So go to the next. So that's what Kyunghee was doing in the realm of a Western fashion, like a Yangjang style. But then let's go to hanbok. So for hanbok boutiques, American style fashion shows were a novelty. And now there is an important character, historical figure named Lee Ja. She started making hanbok to supplement her household income at a corner of Yangjang, run by her cousin. As gatherings and parties are held at a hotel, women needed a lavish outfit. Married women were not fashionistas. To show modesty and splendor together, hanbok dress was a suitable choice. From 1960s, Yi started showing hanbok as a party dress at fashion show style showcases. It was Lee Ja who started showing hanbok on mannequins. Previously, hanbok is a flat garment, so you just lay out flat. But she dressed hanbok on top of the Western style mannequin so that it looks a little bit more fashionable. And then moving on. And then she called herself hanbok designer. That's a new word, hanbok designer. as opposed to hanbok maker or hanbok seamstresses. Into the 1980s, neighborhood or a village had ladies who sewed clothes for other families, and they also wanted to make a supplemental income. Through word of mouth, one can find someone who can make a hanbok or place an embroidery for bridal ensembles such as bedcloth, pillowcases, and so forth. However, he set a high standard and followed the model of fashion designers like Nora-no and Kyunghee. So on the right, what you are seeing is a group of works that was created for first ladies, of Korea. So this is Irija's Hanbok fashion show from 1975. So among these innovations, an A-line silhouette is most notable. As he made hanbok for ladies competing at Miss Korea competition or Miss Universe, a Western style tall stature was important. With an A-line silhouette, women were able to wear high heels underneath the skirt and had an elegant balance with the flared skirts. He also made korum, like the ribbon for the jogori, very long, that accentuated verticality. By making jogori and chima in the same color, the red hanbok for a Miss Universe competition gave an impression of the one-piece robe. Adding gold foiling on the arms along the shoulders and the hems of the skirt, those added a dramatic and splendid effect. His use of sekdong was also fascinating. A zigzag style arrangement of sekdong, color stripes, enhanced modernity of hanbok. These designs were reproduced in fashion photography for women's magazines or calendars. Have you ever seen the calendars from 1970s and 80s? There are always fashionable women with a monthly calendar. So that's the way of consuming the design. Ordinary citizens were consuming unprecedented variations of good old hanbok in this new mode. So as a person who was born in 1970s, I remember I wore sort of a knockoff Iriza hanbok throughout my teenage years. I didn't know it was a market purchased hanbok, but it was all the designs of Iriza. While studying for this period, I realized that I was wearing Iriza design without knowing. So meanwhile, Korean women had an insatiable appetite for something new and stylish. And that's what you saw in Jungtaek Lee's presentation, right, in the 1920s and 30s. In this exhibition called Hanbok, Women's Hanbok Encountering Modernity, held in 2018 at Daegu National Museum, people could see that Korean women had a diverse category of textiles. So this is a textile called Newton. In Japanese way, they say Newton, but I wonder what the English counterpart is. It's more like a Newton silk or something. Some are original silk, some are synthetic textiles, and it's very slippery and thin. And sewing together is not easy. So that's why sewing machine is very efficient. So they made this ensemble out of new textiles. Speaking of chima, do you remember in Jungtaek Lee's presentation there was a category about what to use to make hanbok chima? So if you see this exhibition scene, you can see various types of non-hanbok textiles, non-traditional textiles used to create various skirts from 1950s and 60s. Going back to this Iriza style hanbok of the same color, and then you put impressive design on the skirt. That is Jung Young-yang's peacock dress from 1967. Is this on view? This is not, but that's okay. You have other works from that period. This is hand embroidered. So they also add another layer of craftsmanship and artisanal skills, so hand stitched. So now I want to talk a little bit about different aspects of it. That is, for street fashion, women had access to some technological innovation. Korean nylon companies were able to manufacture pantyhoses. Electric sewing machines were more powerful and efficient. Korean textile companies produced high-demand synthetic textiles. In this context, one must acknowledge hard-working Korean women's contributions to economic development. So before I go to that images of hard-working Korean women, I wanted to take a look at that stocking advertisement, pantyhose. Well, these days, not many people wear pantyhose. It's not like a required social etiquette, but it's introduced along with popularity of a miniskirt. In late 1960s and 70s, there was a huge wave of miniskirt. So pantyhose were also sold really well. And this is also a period when the conglomerates or major companies of Korea started their production of synthetic textiles. And they accumulated pretty good capital by exporting this. And do you see this purple, not a purple, but ultra blue hanbok dress, and then below that's like a velvet dress. So these are not typically used for hanbok making. It's like a velvet, it's like a European velvet. But that was a popular textiles for hanbok making. And it was not allowed to import this kind of fancy glittering textiles from Hong Kong, but they did anyhow. But sewing is very hard to make hanbok out of these slippery, textiles. But Lee Ja, for example, she sold a lot of velvet hanbok, and that's how her boutique became known. So anyhow, 1970s is a period when Korea became one of the most leading export of textiles. Right? Moving on. So women's contribution, so especially from the early 1960s to the end of 1970s, was a period called Korean style compressed modernity and the economic miracle of Han River. Women worked 14 to 16 hours a day when overseas clients sent high volume orders. Women from rural villages worked during the day and went to school in the evening. If they saved enough money, they could go to choice 국제, fashion academy, or even a university. For those factory workers or at-home seamstresses, we do not know much about their knowledge transfer. At the National Folk Museum, I found a notebook owned by a woman. It is a notebook for this woman named Jang Ok-sun. And if you go inside, you can see some recipes, pasted scraps from magazines, and copied dress patterns. I can imagine her friend borrows this notebook, or this woman could revise her measurements for a family member. Assiduous Korean women were everywhere. While Choi's 국제 Fashion Academy educated young designers, Dr. Jung Young-yang helped more unfortunate ladies to learn embroidery and receive a meager income to overcome poverty. Jung eventually made a successful business enterprise by selling hand-embroidered handkerchiefs and scarves. Below Lee Ja's hanbok design boutique, there was a multi-level system of producing and disseminating hanbok for special occasions. Hanbok is a clothes for special occasions, like engagement, wedding, funerals, and 60th birthday parties, and bridal parties as mother of the bride or the groom, or you wear hanbok for nieces and nephews. For hanbok making, major wholesale markets in Dongdaemun, East Gate, or Namdaemun, South Gate, and they had silk merchants from the late Joseon dynasty who sold fabrics. As they sold the cloth, they also hired seamstresses to make ceremonial hanboks for the bridal party or the anniversary celebration. As design historian Yuna Lee mentioned in her article, Fashioning Tradition in Contemporary Korean Fashion, published in 2017, Korean people consider the hanbok a garment for special occasions. I quote, "Hanbok largely remains a dress for special occasions, such as weddings, funerals, ceremonial rituals, symbolizing a distinctive Korean tradition and heritage," unquote. With the rise of women's magazines or lifestyle magazines, such as 주부생활, like a housewife's life, or 여성동화, women's donga, and so on, hanbok designs for seasonal festivals were introduced. New Year's Day or Autumn Moon Festival or popular wedding seasons in May and October, readers can see a wide range of hanbok samples. Hanbok designer Lee Ja and later Lee Kyunghee collaborated with a number of stylists and photographers to those pages in the magazines. So now going to 1980s. South Korea participated in global events like the 1984 Asian Games and the 1988 Olympic Games. These were opportunities to let the world know about economic miracle South Korea achieved. For Korean fashion, it was the age of ready-to-wear fashion. Tailoring boutiques for women's wear remained in Myeongdong, but barely survived the trend of manufactured clothes. Women's interest in fashion was beyond clothes, as the color advertisements were inserted in newspapers from the 1970s, and color television broadcasts started in the early 1980s. Colorful makeup became more and more important. Korean cosmetic companies, like Amore Pacific, were churning out aggressive marketing campaigns to show their products by hiring fashion icons of each period. So this is not really related to 1980s, but just to draw your attention for your entertainment, I show you some good-looking young people, and they are, what are they selling? School uniforms. They are selling school uniforms, but when that boring school uniforms are worn by these fancy, handsome young men, look different, right? Do you want to buy one? So that's my point. Aggressive marketing campaigns, right? Do you recognize this? The girl in blue background? Famous. This is Suji, like famous. And then this is a famous BTS. They were also selling school uniforms, maybe 10 years ago when they are much younger. So the point I want to make is this. In street fashion, Korean students had a brief period of abolishment of school uniforms in 1980s. It's called 교복 자유화. It's like a liberation from the school uniforms. However, gradually, parents and students opted in to wear school uniforms for convenience and to maintain identity as students, like 학생답게, like they want to look like students. Until the 1980s, school uniforms were made by mom and pop small tailors near each school. Students also got a letter saying that you have to go to designated school uniform tailors. However, with the rise of ready-to-wear companies, tailored school uniforms disappeared by the mid-1990s. Some people committed suicide. And you hear about this in the news broadcast. Now, school uniforms are just like any other trendy clothes. Large companies hire the most popular celebrity of each year to advertise their brand of school uniforms. So when we talk about the uniforms, we usually define it as an anti-fashion item because there is no fashionable change. So it's anti-fashion. But in Korean market, school uniforms change all the time. And these are functional clothes. So it looks like this look, but they also know that some people have longer legs, some people have shorter legs, and they have all kinds of little hidden gadgets so that you can adjust in it. And also waistband, it's rubber, so you can adjust as you grow. It's a high tech in a way, but I'm a little disappointed that all these small shops disappeared, and basically it's the large companies left. And I am going back to Hyungji. Remember the elite school uniform, Hyungji company, okay? So briefly, let's go back to Olympic Games. Lee Ja and Lee Kyunghee designed hanbok with 5 circle Olympic symbols. So that's the hanbok design for the special occasions. But anyhow, there is a snapshot showing the street fashion system of hanbok making. Ordinary people would consume what is popular in print magazine and visit a silk merchant in Jongno 3ga, like the Jongno Avenue 3, or the Gwangjang market. They are adjacent. As they are wholesale merchants, they are much more affordable than designer boutiques. Eventually, these silk merchants are also out of business by the early 2000s. In the wedding market, young people are now hiring wedding consultants. as their fees are high, wedding consultant fees are high, there is no budget to custom make wedding hanbok for the bride and the groom. They went on ensemble for a photo shoot and then return it. So there is also change and custom-made hanbok market. Now, okay, I started at 20, so I have to finish at 50, right? So time is running up, but quickly, because you don't know Sunday Seoul, I want to introduce Sunday Seoul. Do you see the magazine photograph? So it's now out of print, but it was very popular journal, like a lot of people read it on the subway, on a bus, and it's full of scandal. It's like a national empire, like a ISO UFO kind of thing, right? So, but again, this is a way of disseminating popular fashion culture. They would say something like, it's so shocking, the skirt is so short, right? But then, what you feel is like, that's really popular thing to do, right? Like, if you want to be in crowd, what do you have to do? You actually think about doing that, those kind of things. Anyhow, now 1990s, and I'm going to finish up only 2 pages left. So, as many of you witnessed, hanbok became globalized. Lee Kyunghee showed her first pret-a-porter collection in Paris in 1993. Seoul Fashion Week started in 1987. The fashion weeks are held in March and October in South Korea. Korea's pret-a-porter market is enormously grown. Tailor-made clothes are only made for special occasions now. So work clothes, party clothes, or daily clothes are all distributed through department stores and then through popular e-commerce shopping malls these days. 1998 IMF economic crisis brought closure to some popular ready-to-wear clothing companies, while some companies became more popular. The more popular one is Kyunghee Group. So I just want to introduce briefly. So the CEO of Kyunghee Group is Choi Byung-oh, and he started his shop, like a small shop, in Dongdaemun, Eastgate Market, in 1982. And he withstood the IMF crisis, and now Kyunghee is one of the largest ready-to-wear company, and they have a big headquarters in Incheon, Songdo now. So just as a tribute to Kyunghee, she sought to create a global brand out of her hanbok, but then there was a movement to go back to authenticity and indigeneity of hanbok. That's 1990s, like naturalism and these things. But anyhow, before I go there, these are the examples. Remember the APEC Summit 2005, Kyunghee, Durumaki, and then this is the famous pilot. Are they on the display? Both of them are on the display. But that naturalism, so there is another hanbok designer called Hyun. Have you ever heard of him? Hyun? He was originally a television actor. However, he was interested in hanbok making, and he studied with Dr. Seok at Dankook University. So he learned what the traditional form of hanbok is with a dress historian. He was interested in natural dyes and late Joseon dynasty silhouette. And he was also a bit concerned about hanbok being rebranded as something equivalent to pret-a-porter. Instead of using women's wear mannequins, He designed his own Korean style face and hand in cloth-covered soft body forms. The image, the display case is in Irija's Hanbok Center. And do you see the woman's mannequins? So it's not the Western style ready-to-wear mannequin. Underneath it's just the body wires, like a body foam. But then if you see the face and the hand, these are custom-made Korean style face. So rounder, and then you can see some pictures, right? So that's Hyun's ideas. Hyun's niece is fashion designer, hanbok designer, Kim Hae-soon, and she is carrying the legacy. Have you ever watched the KBS drama Hangjini from 2007, I think? Okay, a lot of so she brought popularity to the 18th century hanbok style, at least like an early 19th century hanbok. So short jogori, and then bold color contrast, and then very short goru, like a ribbon, and it was sensational. So in the beginning, when Korea palaces were open to those who wear hanbok entering palace for free, a lot of like a rental hanbok was imitating the Kim Il-sung style hanbok. I see all like thousands of Hangjini in the Gyeongbokgung Palace. In the first quarter of the 21st century, it's almost at the end, there is no doubt that Korean fashion, whether high-end or street fashion, draws much attention from global fashion industry. During the pandemic, the Korea Tourism Organization uploaded a video promotion. It received more than 200 million views on YouTube. In a similar case, a K-pop group BTS member participated in audio guide recording for a new exhibition of Korean modern art. This is currently held at Lakuma. Have you seen this? Well, if you go to LA, oh, you saw it.
I know about it.
Oh yeah, because of BTS? So this is what happens in my own classroom too. So I teach Korean modern art. This is famous Ikwaede. Ikwaede is a self-portraiture in Korean Durumagi, like I explained hybrid fashion. But then the context that they remember is oh, like RM is standing next to it. Thank you so much that you recognize this. So this is the context of it. And Feel the Rhythm of Korea. Have you seen this? You should go see it. It is extremely entertaining. And then the stylists, Inaichi is the singers, and then the Ambiguous is a dance group, but their styling is amazing. Anyhow, that's not the main point. To hear these incidents gave something to think about. We have different directions to work on. It is notable that Korean government or governmental subsidiaries, foundations, are spending a large budget to promote K-brand popular culture, including fashion. With the Rinaldi video, the Korea Tourism Organization spent over $10 million to hire the YouTube advertisement service. You have to pay in order to show up in the best algorithm, right? So they got some criticism. So you can think about these questions. But moving on, with all these questions in mind, I'd like to bring your attention to fashionable people in Korean art circle in the early 20th century. As Jungtaek Lee's presentation showed us, there's a huge demand or desire to be fashionable. And I can even go back to the 18th century. And that's actually Lee Talbot's study for your dissertation too. These Confucian authors, they criticize the new and trendy fashion. But what does that mean? They're very engaged, right? They care about it. So moving on, this is the artist Ikwaede. Usually he's in, dandy, but then he depicted himself in that sartorial identity. And then look at all these artists, and I'm so glad that Professor Kim-Renaud showed the author Han Mu-suk's earlier photographs, and she should be included in this area, like a sartorial identity, how authors, creators, they are fashion leaders, influencers. So they also went to popular space. So fashion is a system. You don't wear just for yourself. You want to go somewhere to show yourself and to be seen. So these are the cafes, also art galleries. So finally, it's a conclusion. So there are usually contradictory positions. As this exhibition posited in its purpose, how can one, quote, blend the historical and avant-garde, local and cosmopolitan, and high and popular culture to create a distinctive and compelling Korean voice, unquote. So that was one position that this exhibition posed to us. And I want to ask, do we need a Korean voice with a manufacturing convention of a country of origin? Is really important, high-end fashion made in Korea. Does it really matter? Eventually, it may matter. In my own view, I would like to see what people are currently creating in their metaverse with various options for dressing one's own avatar. And one may see 3D print-ready hanbok outfit design as well, because hanbok design is very innovative. So this is what Lee Talbot mentioned, like Kim Young-jin's brand called Chai. Chai means difference, how to be different. And Karl Lagerfeld used the Korean vocabulary to create his own high-end fashion. So do we want to see more non-Korean people using Hanbok elements to create a global fashion, right? That's another direction. There are some controversial cases of how to interpret your own culture with Vogue Korea. I want to write a book on Vogue Korea's featuring Hanbok. If you do the netnography, if you read the internet comments, there are really divided opinions. A lot of Korean people criticize a lot of it. And in my own view, this Vogue Korea particularly, because this is a Condé Nast publication for global distribution, they have a certain position, and that's coming from very much 19th century style Orientalism. And we have these postcards. So as a scholar of visual culture, I am very worrisome about this type of styling, but if some other creators may argue that it is creativity, and jurors are out there, but I want to write about it. And Song Hye-kyo's that controversial cover magazine for her movie version of Hwang Jin-lee, and that's very much like a Delacroix, painting Algerian women in the 19th century, to me. Anyhow, so this is the end. So what are you going to do? There are different positions, but something to think about, because history is being written right now. So we don't know what Hanbok is going to look like 2050. But I want to see 3D printer, like a easy to wear Hanbok, like a easy to move around. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
All right, our next speaker, Michael Hurt, is a photographer and professor living in Seoul since 2002. He started Korea's first street fashion blog in 2006 and published the first English language book about Korean fashion in 2009. He researches youth, street fashion, and digital subcultures in Seoul. His present research focuses on using the camera to access and document emergent digital subcultures in Korea. As a visual sociologist, he applies analyses that center visuality to interpretations of why Hallyu is not just unstoppable, but inevitable, and therefore not at all surprising. Please join me in welcoming Michael Hurt.
We're going to start a short video that I prepared, and then switch over to my computer. So hopefully that'll go over without a hitch.
한국의 패션이 새로운 한류 콘텐츠로 주목받고 있습니다. 정부는 세계적인 브랜드 또는 디자이너 육성에 힘을 쏟고 있는데요. 하지만 정작 해외에서는 한국의 길거리 패션에 더 큰 관심을 보이고 있습니다. 윤현숙 기자입니다.
국내 최대 패션 행사 서울 패션위크가 한창인 서울 DDP. 패션쇼장 바깥은 스트리트 패션의 무대입니다. 개성 있게 차려입은 사람들이 저마다의 패션 감각을 자랑합니다. 베레모와 붉은색 체크 등 올가을 유행 아이템을 자신만의 방식으로 소화했습니다.
베레모 지금 유행하고 있으니까 페미닌, 여성스러운.
크고 펑퍼짐하고 그다음에 그만큼 축 떨어지면서 몸피 살려주는 옷으로 해서 아방가르드로 입고 있어요.
과하게 찢어진 찌청이 요새 많이 유행을 해서 그렇게 입고 이렇게 위에 상의 크롭으로 코디를 해서
10년 넘게 한국의 스트리트 패션을 연구해온 마이클 허트 교수는 한국의 스트리트 패션은 이제 그 자체가 하나의 브랜드라고 말합니다. 트렌드를 빠르게 반영하는 동대문 의류업계와 온라인 쇼핑몰은 세계적 패션 브랜드 자라가 경쟁 상대로 꼽을 정도입니다.
일본, 미국, 딴 나라에서 이렇게 받아들이는 건데 근데 뭐 겉으로만 보면은 그냥 카피만 했다. 오리지널리티 없다. 크리에이티비티 없다. 뭐 근데 그 믹스 자체는 그 크리에이티브이라고 생각해요.
잡지 화보 못지않은 연출과 감성이 담긴 사진들이 SNS를 통해 퍼지면서 해외 언론도 한국의 스트리트 패션을 주목하고 있습니다. 브랜드 대신 스타일이 더 중요해지고 국경이 없어진 온라인 시대.
한국 스트리트 패션은 해외로 뻗어나가고 있습니다. YTN 윤현숙입니다.
My apologies for that somewhat self-indulgent seeming video, but I was pretty proud of that, actually. That was 2016, and some people in the news started actually believing what I was saying about Korean street fashion, so I was happy to see that happen. But yeah, that kind of sets the tone for me, my involvement in street fashion in Korea, the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, and Seoul Fashion Week as an event. So that's a perfect video to kind of get that going. First, let me introduce myself briefly and tell you why I was even invited here in the first place. So brief background is I come from ethnic studies, actually, at Berkeley. And I came to Seoul in 2002 to do my dissertation, but I didn't finish until 2014 because I got sidetracked by what Walker Evans calls the hungry eye of street photography. But in the big picture, I've been in Korea for 22 years, been doing street photography, not street fashion photography, since 2002. And that eventually, once I finished my dissertation, evolved into what some people call visual sociology. But before I get really down to it, I want to cover the inevitable question of what the hell is street fashion and why should you care about it? First of all, real street fashion, to give the academic-y kind of definition, real street fashion is kind of pulling people who are actually naturally on a given street in a public place where people actually naturally go. And it's basically anthropology with the camera. What people also talk about a lot is ethnography, the study of people. And is not asking fashionable people to gather in the street scene to pose for pictures, which is a common cheat. So you get cool people who are already fashionistas, fashionable people, and you put them in the street and you say that's street fashion. That's frankly what most Korean street fashion is and has been. So, sorry. Had to make that swipe. And my work is not K fashion. It's not this stuff. So this is not that concept. So what I kind of have a problem with when you put a K in front of things is every attempt to K-ify something is really an attempt to insert cultural industry control over it and imply enlightened government foresight and ingenious forward planning, which sometimes happens, but not often. It's really an attempt to claim credit when often it's a bunch of kids doing something weird well. And when that goes viral, that's when you have a K form, K-pop, K-style, whatever. But actually the real reason you should care about real street fashion is as a real piece of organically grown, street-to-table, actual from the streets popular culture. They're real cultural signals from the wild, real indicators of what's going on in society. They're actual data points, not pieces of advertising or PR. And one reason my fashion blog got popular back in 2006 and was actually looked at by a lot of fashion industry professionals who were suddenly interested in Korean culture, it was because I was one of the only ones out there systematically documenting what was actually on the street, what people were actually wearing that weren't setups. But before continuing, I also want to give a short primer on what street fashion even is, because this is a thing for real, and it's a mediated social practice. So as such, street fashion is a pretty short history as a mediated social practice, or a media practice, that's linked to one, consumer culture in cities, and two, shifts in fashion media, and centers on the idea that the street fashion portrait, this is kind of why I define it, the street fashion portrait is one, a document of reality, and as such, two, possesses some degree of candidness. It's actually factually real. In this sense, it is inherently ethnographic and has its roots in a documentary imperative. So, major milestones in street fashion as we know it today. So 1980, you have the straight up, the so-called straight up, as a documentary style of photography pioneered by Terry Jones, founder and editor-in-chief of ID magazine in 1977, coming out of the UK. Straight up is typically a head-to-toe portrait of someone street cast with great personal style. Someone they got from the street and brought into their little office and actually shot against the wall. And then 1997, and the interesting thing here is in the history of what we understand as street fashion, Japan, Asia has played a large role. So you have, this is for me where I first saw what would be understood as street fashion. Well, I encountered this in a book called Fruits of the compiled portraits by photographer Shoichi Aoki, who started Fruits in 1997. That kind of brought things from the subculture. Harajuku girls, all the Harajuku, Shibuya, all that stuff that we know about is basically because of that guy. And then the slicker, more polished look of street fashion comes from Scott Schumann. Anybody know the sartorialist? He was big for a while. And yeah, he was, the thing is, he was an industry insider and a talented photographer who curated this image of real street style, even though it was a narrowly defined kind of view of high fashion and a very culture industry view. And I don't have this as a picture up here. 2012 was a big year in between the years here. This was when Instagram was founded, and actually, for the Korean point of view, Facebook use in Korea started to shift to Western social media. So by 2012, people had abandoned Cyworld. Me Today was a memory, but people were on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And by 2014, keep this date in your head, Korea was all about Instagram. All the fashionistas were all over Instagram, and Seoul Fashion Week moved to its permanent location at Dongdaemun Design Plaza. Who's been to DDP? Good number of people. It's become an international attraction. Zaha Hadid's, famous last major piece. But it was back in 2007, let's go back to that. This is when I started the fashion blog, and I was told by a friend, you've got to go to this thing called Seoul Fashion Week, or at that time, Seoul Collection was kind of the big term. So by 2008, I was hitting Seoul Fashion Week to easily document not just changes in trends, but modes of identity and gender expression amongst Seoul's pepi, passion people, right? That term wasn't coined back then. I think this is something that came a little bit later. And I started realizing, shooting them, that these pepi, basically fashion fans, they're model fans of certain people who would come out. They would organize on, in Dom cafes, and they would be waiting, very dressed up in the lines, they basically were my easy, lazy way of recording what's hot, what people are going to be wearing. And I started realizing that whatever they're wearing, and I realized this rule was inviolate, whatever they're wearing, whatever the pepi are wearing as a pattern, no matter how weird or crazy, it is what everybody's going to be wearing in about 3 to 6 months in Seoul. And I started not doubting that, and started being able to predict things. But it was a good way to bring all the trendsetters to me, and not having to chase them on the street or wait on the street corner for 3 hours. So it was actually kind of a way of getting better pictures, better examples, but I also started to get lazy. But going back to my introduction, I started this whole thing with street fashion, street photography, and just documenting reality on the streets of Seoul. So in a way, the documentary imperative kind of started influencing my take on photography and taking pictures of people in the city. And actually, instead of doing drive-by shooting and taking pictures of people without their permission, which actually wasn't as illegal as a lot of people in Korea thought it was, that became illegal in 2013. But this kind of made my approach to photography inherently, deeply ethnographic. And I started actually, so as I was taking pictures like this, I started becoming more interested in gender performativity. Those of you, anyway, Judith Butler theory, I started taking more pictures related to how people were performing gender. But I realized that in order to keep doing that well, and to kind of capture the things I wanted to capture, in order to be not creepy about it, you have to start just to capture those moments. You can try to capture them through maybe fashion and how they're expressing, how people are expressing things, versus just drive-by shooting, which, as I mentioned again, became pretty dangerous and illegal for a photographer from, I think it was April 2013. So, this was actually my first, sorry, I should go back to this is my first, I don't know why I did that, I just wanted to do that. This is my first street fashion portrait. This is in Apgujeong. And by this time, I decided to go full in on the idea of just stopping people and taking their portraits. And actually, random story, one of the three young ladies in the picture later went on to work for Naver, and then she kind of rose up and was like, oh, I know the guy who first started taking street fashion pictures, and they asked me to do an article for them on Naver. It's a small world with fashion people. But yeah, by 2007, I started the first street fashion blog that featured full-on ethnographic coverage of real, randomly chosen subjects on the streets of Seoul. Proud of that. There are other people who are taking what we now consider street fashion pictures. A few people, there was one guy called Your Boyhood who would take really fashionable people, bring them into his studio, and take their pictures. There are people on hiphopper.com or co.kr, I forget which, who are, taking communities taking pictures of each other in mostly hip hop clothing. But in terms of real non-setup kinds of things from the streets, that was me. Pretty soon, my photographic and ethnographic technique were starting getting better and really starting to gel, and I've kind of fallen into a groove. So, yeah, while I have the chance, I'm not going to run over there and get off the mic. So I'm in Myeongdong, and at this point I've got assistants because I'm getting tired of asking people. Again, I'm getting lazier. And this guy walks by with a can in his head, and I said, how can I not? And I was taking pictures in this area and flashing. Stand was out. It looked kind of fancy. So this young office worker who was kind of dressed up actually looked very conservative, came over, slided up next to us and was like, can you take my picture? And I'm like, really? You want me to? I'm like, yeah, I will. And then she got into the frame, and then she asked, can I jump? And I said, please do, because that's one of my most legendary, surprising pieces of ethnographic work. I have no idea why she wanted to jump. She didn't look like the type. Oh, I think okay, here we go. So, this is kind of the evolution of my style and how it evolved as a kind of mixing of social documentary and social portraiture in the street fashion style. But it evolved from its documentary roots in shooting without asking for permission, in a sort of verite aesthetic that actually wasn't legally problematic until, as I mentioned, 2013. And that was, I think, the special act of sexual crimes involving photography. Because that is in relation to, as you probably know, a lot of secret cameras. So that kind of ruined things for the one serious photographer out there trying to not do upskirts, not be in bathrooms, that kind of thing. But that's a thing in Seoul, so you're gonna have to adjust, try not to go to jail. 2006, as I showed you in that picture, I'm starting to go out and more officially take portraits. By 2010, this is Seoul Fashion Week, the time it was in Yeouido. I was using flash on a stand, on a remote, pretty heavily. And by 2016, I'm at DDP. And I'm trying to get out of the actual DDP complex sometimes and use interesting mixed lighting and stuff like that. So But I also want to talk about the DDP complex itself. The picture on the left is of a dedicated Pepi in the Convention Center parking lot in 2007, when it was down in Hakgyo Station in the big convention center. And on the right is a confident main stage model on the big street fashion runway of DDP just this last month, March and October, as was just mentioned. And I think you can see the difference in the style, you can see the difference in how much they're part of the event. Back then, they were just weirdo kids who dressed up and came to the show. They're kind of a weirdo fashion fandom. And they were literally limited to the parking lot. They were outsiders. They're not welcome. There wasn't even a convenience store down at the Hakgyo station, so you couldn't even get a drink of water. So they had to be super dedicated. Now, the main ramp of the DDP, I argue, has become the main kind of ramp, actually, of the event. I'll mention that a little bit later. So you all have heard of the DDP. Some of you have been there. Before 2012, the creation and construction of the DDP complex was heavily criticized as a project motivated purely out of the desire to construct a spectacle object. And that was a completely valid criticism. But nobody read what Zaha Hadid's architects were actually saying with the theory. They were talking about this thing called parametricism 2.0. And it was frankly a little bit BS-y. And most people didn't buy it because they were arguing that this is the next step of design is enabled by parametric equations. And like, what are you talking about? No one knew what they were talking about. So what they were saying was that they were designing a multimodal space. What is that? And the way they described it, much as modern social existence assigns us multiple careers, social roles, and even multiple identities, the social uses of space needs to vary. This is the design principle behind the DDP. And actually, the opening event for this building, 2014, was Seoul Fashion Week. So I was one of the people with a press pass who was able to work inside the building. And if you're inside the building, you can understand it. Like even walking through the complex today, you're not inside, moving through all the weird passages and whatnot. But I can say the building is very spatially and socially unusual. It doesn't fit into any familiar or comfortable notion of buildings today. But it is in that very way that the building provided a potentially powerful way to energize and connect with certain aspects of indigenous Seoul culture. So the idea of the building is that the social uses, the space adjusts to the social uses of the people inside the space. And they had this whole long academic description of it, which sounds kind of crazy, it's difficult to understand. But working inside it, I realized what they were saying. So basically, these people started becoming the main characters. And I want to talk about hypermodernity. So this is going to be my most difficult slide to get through in a minute. Okay. So hypermodernity, and I would say that the Pepi are actually a hypermodern subculture, or in a way, hyperculture. I'll talk about that. So anyway, hypermodernity stipulates a world in which the object has been replaced by the attributes of the object. For those who like talking about simulation and Baudrillard, it's not a computer-simulated matrix he's actually concerned with, but rather what happens when grape-flavored drinks replace grapes, and thereafter copies of the copies of the copies until we're drowning in an alphabet soup of floating signifiers completely disconnected from their originals, which get mixed and matched freely. So in a way, a hypermodern view is that you take bits and pieces of culture, you can construct any identity you want, you can change genders, races, nowadays that's a thing, but that's actually quite hypermodern. You know, the idea of cultural appropriation is a very conservative American idea, actually, because Americans are sort of wedded to this idea of the original. I think when you look at K-pop, you have this idea, well, that sounds good, that's cool, let's put together a new thing. Oh, we didn't invent that. The thing that I think gets K-pop people able to get away with things is no one claims authorship of rap, for example. There's free and sometimes questionable, from an American perspective, use, appropriation of all these elements, but that's actually what makes it work, right? that's actually why Korean cinema, why Parasite works. That's why Korean fashion works. That's what these kids have essentially taken over. So I talk about in my work, paper I wrote about this, how the Pepi, the Prussian people, these kids, this is a middle school girl from Kyunghee, who just came in, and their community basically bum rushed Seoul Fashion Week on the weekend, the one day of Saturday shows. So this is a space in where the background is the foreground, up is down, inside is outside, and even the street is a runway, which has allowed these bit players to become the main attraction. So now the bit players, these young kids with no social capital, cultural capital, are the main event, and the runway shows, the extensive reason for having a fashion week in the first place, has just become social capital window dressing for the real runway, which is the middle ramp with all the street fashion action. Because if you look at, if you do a Google search for Seoul Fashion Week in quotes, what you should get is all industry event kind of related pictures if you do a picture search. But all you see is street fashion, street fashion, street fashion. You might see a couple runway shows, but one day I counted and it was like 90% street fashion pictures at the Seoul Fashion Week event. And these people are, basically models in the Instagram age. You can be as famous as you want to be if you have the styling skill. So in my photography, I've worked to develop an aesthetic that reflects Seoul's hyper-reality. So I think you can see in the pictures this visual way of showing this heavily mediated reality. So I like to leave in the obvious heavy filters and stuff from Instagram itself. And I try to do this thing that I now call spatial and social layering. The images should ideally match the idea of showing the subject in relation to a space of simultaneity in which, that's from Zaha Hadid's mumbo jumbo. This space of simultaneity in which layers of space and spaces of social action are visible in relation to each other. Photographically, this means a sense of layers and separations between elements and actors while being unified within the same frame without a feeling of discrete separation between them. So basically, what a photographer would call environmental portraits. So you can see this is like the street fashion look, the belts, the street fashion brands, and also in this frame, in DDP, you're indoors, but you're outdoors because you can see the sky, and there's room for drone operators. So I'm catching drones, and lots of strange things in one frame. So this is what I call the hypermodern stew. And I feel like when I have these pictures, within these frames, they're telling a lot of stories. So in this I call this picture the hypermodern stew. This is an alphabet soup of signs and symbols in which the thin string connecting the refers and the reference have been snipped and now float around in a soup of unmoored meaning. If you look at her outfit, English language words from the consumer cultures of food, slang learned in the media, as well as porn get mixed with the aesthetically pleasing Nike swoosh, while the Korean flag looms in the background of the DDP, while being overshadowed by the historically important Miliore building, kind of the home of, fast fashion, which is a private branded hive in the literature, a vertically integrated sweatshop / business to consumer fast fashion retail shop that actually enables all of her clothing to get made. So, that technically violates a lot of copyright. Nike wouldn't be happy about that, but it happens all the time. I'm going to take another swipe. So there's a Vice documentary talking about the counterfeit fashion culture of Korea. And it talks about how Korea must address its counterfeiting culture in order to grow as a fashion hub in the world. And the thing is just a bunch of crap. There's no demonstration of knowledge about the fact that it's that quasi-legal fast fashion culture that enabled Korea to put itself on the map in the first place. Because who do you think was making all the textiles that all the Harajuku girls and Shibuya people are wearing. It all comes from Dongdaemun, so they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so this picture is what I call exploded view. So this young lady is actually a florist who said she wanted to come to Seoul Fashion Week to show that women should be able to wear tattoos, and she wanted to show off her new tat that she got. And she was all about her, she wanted to show off this thigh tattoo. So this is kind of like, so when I was taking the picture, a lot of people were staring at me because they're like, you're upskirting that girl. I'm like, actually no, she's upskirting me. Like, I mean, she's exploded out what should be inside the skirt, and she's making this very strong statement. And I'm just catching what she's throwing down. So I felt like there's a lot going on in terms of gender, assertions of what women can, should or shouldn't be able to do. So yeah, I joke, when I show this picture, sometimes people are like, oh, I'm like, actually, look at what's happening. I'm not looking at anything she's not put outside the skirt. She's actually making the transgressive statement. So again, if you read clothing as cultural text, I just named this one street because when you look at Korean fashion, when my interns who come to Seoul Fashion Week say, I want to wear an outfit tomorrow that's really street, what they mean is they want to wear something that's layered with fishnet pattern. Nowadays the idea is to layer fishnets in this really avant-garde Yahan way, this kind of risque kind of way. So actually you pull your fishnet stockings up over your pant line to show off, sort of like the old thong over the jeans kind of thing a long time ago. But what's funny is she's definitely layered and she's doing a lot of trends at the same time. The ripped jeans, so ripped you wonder, how do those pants even kind of cohere? How do they stay together? But she's doing everything. But actually I came to find out that she's not pulling up her fishnets over her waist, but the pants are actually constructed that way. Right? So it's pretty interesting. So there's like this preset, easy way to be edgy. And it's pretty interesting to keep thinking about. Okay, so this one kind of related to the title of the talk, code smashing. So one of the favorite people I've shot over the years at DDP was this pretty representative, she had this pretty representative look and she was mixing high and low fashion markers, casual and formal, dressed down and fancy. I really liked how she accented these contrasts with the pearl necklace and choker and the sporty formal look. And also her makeup is beast mode. So, because when you shoot people with, I have a 600-watt external studio unit, and at this time of day I was using full power because you have to with that much brightness behind her. If your makeup can withstand that much, usually you hire professional makeup artists to do that level of work, but that's just what she wore. She did it by herself, and that's pretty common these days. So she's legendary level. So this is what I kind of call runway street compression. What I find most interesting about the role that street fashion plays in the Korean fashion industry is that it seems in Korea the feedback loop and the conversation that happens between runway and the street seems much, much tighter than in other places. And literally, when you go to Seoul Fashion Week these days, I've noticed many designers come and go, and especially after COVID, it's been brutal. A lot of the people I knew are just, they're not showing, not trying to shell out $20,000 for a fashion show. And the secret is at Seoul Fashion Week, nobody buys. Nobody's buying anything there. So that's a problem. Established designers are no longer just putting on shows just to say they're at Seoul Fashion Week. So what a lot of designers have been doing, the more successful ones, is you've got to run some kind of street brand or street fashion version of your brand. So you've got to have the high and the low. No one's buying high, so you've got to have something that, because there are lots of everyday people, kids in school uniforms, who buy tickets that have to be publicly sold by Seoul Fashion Week because it's a publicly funded Ministry of Culture supported event. So you can't make it elite and keep people out. You can't make it New York Fashion Week, Mercedes-Benz New York Fashion Week, right? You've gotta keep it open. So there's a brand I like called Cressy Dim, Crescendo Diminuendo, and the street fashion version of their brand is Dimi Cress. So they kind of did that kind of thing. So yeah, so when you look at fashion shows here, this model who I shot when she was like 15 and just she was one of those weird fashion fans, and now she's one of the top models at Seoul Fashion Week. So anyway, the fact that she's in there shows a large shift in how Seoul Fashion Week is run, because now they run open auditions, and anybody with talent can get into the shows. I mean, it helped that she's like 6 feet tall, but yeah. So basically, what she's wearing was what everybody was doing for Halloween. Obviously, Harley Quinn. This graphiste Manji is like really into their like smashing of barriers and that kind of thing. And yeah, she's carrying the bat and she's putting out some of the most edgy poses I've ever seen at Seoul Fashion Week. Because basically at Seoul Fashion Week, anyway, I'm going to continue. Next slide. Okay, so that's the previous slide. Okay, so how am I doing on time? I've got 3 overflow slides. So, okay. So in talking about the spread of the street fashion aesthetic, and those in the know, does anyone know what makes this super obviously Korean? If you saw them walk. The what? Fila, yes. They're Disruptor 2s. Fila is now a Korean brand. Because Fila got bought by a Korean company in 2006, and Fila has been running, because the dad, chunky, ugly shoes is a huge thing now. And Fila was like, we're going to sell all the stuff that Nike and now New Balance, Reebok, where they come from, all the stuff that was popular in the 80s. They're going to run their own kind of clunky shoes, ugly dad shoes, and they're going to sell them for $50, not 150. Nike Air Force Ones are very popular, but they're pricey. So Korean women love the Disruptor 2s. And that's become kind of the Korean street fashion marker. If you're into Korean street fashion, those particular pairs of shoes is what these 2 Finnish girls who brought their parents, their dad, who was off screen, just kind of like, oh. And they flew to, I think he was forced to fly the whole crew to Seoul Fashion Week, and they're walking around doing the most Korean looks there are. And the thing that I noticed is when I did this thing, I was taking these pictures for Huffington Post, trying to talk about real Gangnam style, anyway. So I was going around identifying the most representative super Korean looks of people in places like Ihwa. So I went to Ihwa neighborhood, and everybody I was pulling aside, they just turned out to be Chinese. So every time I pulled out somebody like this who was just head to toe, every trend item that there was at the time, I was like, you're Korean, sounds a little bit, where are you from? Oh, I'm from China, I'm from China, I'm from China, every time. And I started noticing that, yeah, this is a pattern. Okay, overflow slide 2. Even at Seoul Fashion Week, you've got these people who come to make statements. And you see what's going on. So this gentleman, this person on the right is a famous, I didn't know this at the time, very famous drag queen, Nana Yeom Kim. And on the left, you see what's happening here, right? This is not at Seoul Fashion Week. This is at Seoul City Hall during the queer festival, the Queer Culture Festival. And these 2 young women came out and they were like, we're like doing a wedding thing. So I was like, how long have you been together? Like, oh, we're not marrying each other. This is just our statement. And they brought the bouquet of flowers and everything like that. So you see people actually coming to Seoul Fashion Week to make these statements a lot. Okay, so I'm going to end around here. This is where I am with my work these days. Where I'm going, what I'm doing these days is my own editorial work, kind of like I'm running my own fashion magazine in my head, and shooting my way through Korean Instagram and letting this hypermodernity enabled class of Korean Instagram models who are chock full of what one scholar called entrepreneurial femininity, and who now they define kind of a semi-professional class of what a lot of Korean people call pay models, pay models who have become, they developed a system of getting paid, and actually some people making their own, income, making more than their parents, being models online. And I noticed just in the presentations from this morning, I bought this Hanbok dress randomly with an app called Tangun Market. And it was like 20 bucks. I said, okay, put that in the studio. Didn't know this was a pretty famous design unto itself, and this was a replica of that. So, yeah. Okay, last slide. So this is where I'm at with my studio-based visual aesthetic, where I bring the studio to the street. And this is a woman who was at Seoul Fashion Week. We shot her the day before, and I said, let's do my photo sartorial elicitation technique. So basically, I was like, do you want to do like a mini editorial on the street? Are you coming to Seoul Fashion Week tomorrow? And she's like, yeah. So I'm like, how about if I give you a prompt for you to just style your own, look based on whatever's the hottest thing in Seoul right now. So she's like, okay, I'll be back on the ramp tomorrow at 3. And I was like, okay, we'll meet on the ramp, and we're going to go off the ramp. We're going to go off into the side street, and we're going to do like a Seoul background. And so this is what she wore. And if you look at a lot of the people at Seoul Fashion Week this season, it's all about corsets, and hers was like a legit corset, and tennis skirts are back. But of course, hers is the most extreme possible version of the tennis skirt, and they're getting back to very short hemlines, high hemlines. So she's kind of my representation of where young women especially are at in terms of fashion and representing identity, changes in gender norms. And lots of times people have lots of negative assumptions about people who dress like that, but yes, she's a good student, she's a good girl, whatever. She goes to a Sky University, and she gets good grades, she studies, and she also wants to represent herself this way. And I asked her, do you dress this way on campus? She's like, no way, I'm totally dressed out, but this is how I come to Seoul Fashion Week to represent. So she's, I think, kind of representative of this new class of peppy, and also people who want to become Instagram pay models, those, up their social capital. So that's kind of what's going on with street fashion these days. I'll just end it here. Great. Yeah.
All right, our next presenter is Nana Lee, who is the founder of Viva Cabana, a style and travel content plus commerce platform, and founder and principal owner of the Blank Space Contemporary Art Gallery in New York City. She has worked in the fashion industry for about 20 years alongside her father, noted South Korean designer Lee Sang-bong, and her brother Jungtaek Lee, who is head designer of Lie. Ms. Lee received a Master's of Arts in Design Management from Pratt Institute and has a BA in Fashion Design Women's Wear from Central St. Martin's College of Arts and Design in London. Please join me in welcoming Nana Lee.
Hi everyone, my name's Nana and I'm so excited to be here today. Oh, sorry, totally forgot. And it's my, I feel honored to be here today to talk about Lee Sang-bong, who is a very talented and also creative person, happened to be my dad, and has been working with him for a very long time. And we are going to cover some of his collections that highlights you know, inspirations from traditional Korean elements, as well as, you know, how he got inspired by art, music, you know, theater. He always go to, you know, museums and galleries and watch ballet and musical every week to stay within the arts and interpret that into fashion. So that's Lee Sing-bong, and as you already know, he's been known for his very architectural collections and using traditional influences. We're gonna actually talk about Hangul, Tancheong, Cheokgado, and Changsal today, but some of other non-Korean influences, but from arts. So he's been showing at all the fashion weeks, including Seoul Fashion Week to Paris and New York, and also a lot of museum exhibitions in different countries, as well as he was the first president of CFDK, which is Council of Fashion Designers of Korea, and chair professor at Hongik University. And he actually started, they didn't have a graduate school of fashion there, so he actually started a whole department to educate the young designers. And this is our headquarters in Korea, and also building itself was inspired by, he was part of the designing process, and he was loving all this Korean landscape paintings, traditional landscape paintings. And this was inspired by Mongyu Dongwon-do, and you can see the curves of the building that was incorporated into the design, and that's the entry of our actually flagship store. They have 3 floors of flagship store in there, showcasing the archival collection of Tancheong on the left and some of other collections actually using the Korean traditional paintings on the garment on the right. So actually we have another large exhibition, mega scale exhibition in Seoul right now, currently reflecting 37 years of Lee Sing-bong. And it's called Reflect Exhibition, of showing his iconic styles. And some of these pieces actually shows how architectural it is. So he's really into not just showing fashion as form of clothes, but also the form and body of what it is. And he always studies the body, human body, to actually put that into the context of what fashion is about. It's not just the clothes, like, you know, other professors have been saying that it's how you dress is also showing who you are. And you can see a little bit of Hangul collection on the top, and the Talbot collection, which was also very iconic for us. A lot of celebrities like Lady Gaga and Rihanna were part of the collection for their music videos and public appearances and concerts as well. And this is actually an example of New York fashion shows during New York Fashion Week. And his whole theory about showing fashion shows, not just showing the clothes on the models, but the fashion show itself has to be a total art. So a lot of times it incorporates big production, you know, huge production. And imagine doing this at Lincoln Center. Back then it was at the Lincoln Center, and we had to actually, the very top, we have a beautiful artist, you know, digital film butterflies, but on the floor you can see much, but we had 1900 tiles that was also collaborated with an artist, and we had to do that over a 7-hour period after the last show of the day and before the first, which was ours on the next day. So imagine how, you know, that for 15 or less than 15 minutes of fashion show, he had to actually build out a whole stage to actually people to experience what it is. It's not just about, you know, touch and look of the clothes, but also the movement and whole image of how he's creating his own world of fashion. And this is, these are images of Paris Fashion Week, and you can see, you know, models actually holding all the umbrellas as a finale. And you don't see the image here, but we also had, you know, 5 b-boy dancers for one of our fashion show for Tancheong, and all these b-boys were wearing black costumes and dancing in the dark. And as soon as he took, they took off some of the Velcro parts of the clothing, it glows in the dark, tancheong print. So he was very known for his innovative practice, also doing fashion show, creating the fashion show as a form of a performance and art and kind of non-standard runways. And of course, it gets bigger when he shows at Seoul Fashion Week because he has more people, more power. He can rent a venue for a longer period of time. And this is one of the examples of him creating the whole forest in the middle of the runway at the Seoul Fashion Week. And the models were wearing Mugunghwa collection, which I'll be also sharing a little bit later on the runway. So Hangul is one of the most iconic collections that we will be talking about. Hangul is a Korean alphabet. And a lot of people thought Hangul is not cool. I mean, just because it's, we don't think English and alphabets are just cool to be in fashion or even in high fashion. So when he first introduced this concept or idea of like having Hangul incorporated into fashion, everyone's like, yeah, he's wearing a tie. It's like, I don't think it's gonna be cool. And you can see that this is actually one of the fabric printed, Hangul prints on it. So the story goes, it started with the letter from his friends telling him that I missed your fashion show because I had another appointment, but I wish, great success with your show. And of course, the beauty of, creating beauty is the most exciting thing. And when Lee Sing-bong received this letter, he was so touched, not just by the message, but also the beautiful writings, the calligraphies. So he said, okay, I have to use this in a way that people are not just reading text as like alphabet, but being able to share the stories and also not just visually understanding as a context. So these are two examples of Hangul dresses. One, it's a calligraphy of a letter, and the other one, it was incorporated with a black paint, like black and white paint, traditional paint, with Hangul goes around as a circle. And for this Paris fashion show, we actually had a very famous calligrapher brought in this huge brush to the stage and the live performance of creating all these letters on a white runway, and the models start to walk on that. And these are examples of not only the Hangul was used in clothes or garments, but also incorporating hanbok sash on the detail of the coat. And that's actually a permanent collection at FIT Museum right now. And on the right, you can also see that all these calligraphies were debossed on velvet. So there are a lot of textures and contrast, and even it was printed on silk for the inner fabric. So people couldn't tell if it was part of the fabric in the front or inside, but everything made it more like, fluids as one. And when we first showed it at Paris Fashion Week, we were concerned just because we didn't know how other people, non-Koreans, will react to this. But people loved it. Press loved it, buyers loved it, and they wanted to know the stories of, is that a letter? Is that a poem? Is that, something else? So we were always telling about stories of what it meant. And this was an example of an exhibition of Hangul dresses as well as the Korean ink paintings, actually using the books, the traditional books, as a face of the models. And London exhibition of actually showing Hangul in different decors, threads, and whole exhibition was about showing how Hangul can be cool, and people taking this as not just as language or alphabet, but taking as a story of how Lee Sing-bong brings Hangul into a fashion. And this actually shows an example of how different calligraphies or Hangul alphabets showing in the background of the model. And on the right, the model's wearing, it's a tulle, and it's embroidery Hangul calligraphies. So you can see how it was actually used in many various different ways and techniques and different fabrications. And also the former gold medalist ice skater Yoona Kim were several of Lee Sang-bong's design. And one of them is inspired by Bauhaus, but on the right, she's also wearing Hangul dress on the bottom. And it was specifically designed for her and when she jumps. So when she jumps, the whole dress gets bigger and roundier, and all this Hangul calligraphies of letter gets, it's more visible as a full. Also, there are non-fashion collaborations with large companies. On your left, you can see the porcelain sets. Actually, was a huge collection now at V&A and some other museums. It's a very famous poem called Counting Stars at Night by Yoon Dong-ju, and Lee Sang-bong collaborated with a calligrapher to write that poem on the plate and made this beautiful porcelains. And on the right, you have the first designer's edition cell phone with LG. And he actually had all the poem engraved on the back of the cell phone. And of course, it was sold out. And lastly, of Hangul, this is, I don't know if you can recognize, but it says Google. So it was one of the Google Doodle to celebrate Korean Day, Hangul Day. And Lee designed each letter of Korean alphabet, Hangul, with fabric and garment tie. So he created Kiok, Niun, Tigut, Liu, all different shapes and colors with how you tie your pants, how you tie your scarf to dresses, and then create all this. So it was really fun for us to see it on the full day on Google. And second, it's Dancheong collection. So Dancheong is a Korean traditional colorings on wooden buildings, especially the special buildings like palaces and temples. And the cover, you can see actually it was both used cape and a skirt, collaboration with Yuki Matsueda, Japanese artist, to create this Dancheong skirt that was worn by model. And this is an example of a palace, and you can see the decorated pillars and shapes and artifacts. And also, you can see how it was translated into tights here. And this collection is not just interesting because of various, colorful patterns, but also use of interesting fabrications. So Mr. Lee was one of the first designers to use hologram leather in his collection early on. And also, these Dancheong prints were printed in a different fabrication. For example, I love how it shows in the bottom of the skirts, bottom of the pants. So it's not just the prints that's printed on a fabric, but it actually shows the architectural aspects of how the garment is made. And on the skirts, the interesting about texture is that he loved the play between the sleek fabric, something on silk, something on more furry fabric, and something on like organza. It all looked different. So within that one skirt, you can see the different textures from layers to layers. And this is a great example of using hologram leather into a dress. Super heavy and very hard to wear and also to make. But this was a very interesting concept of actually incorporating Dancheong into more kind of fluid shape. So there are cutouts, laser cutout of Dancheong prints on hologram leather as a whole piece. But he also created and put this strips of black leathers into it to make it much more three-dimensional dress. And also the headpiece is called kiwa. It's from a traditional kiwa, which is used for roofing, traditional roofs like tiles for buildings. And usually comes in black, but we also created it and put a lot of floral prints and colors, Dancheong colors, obangse colors, onto the tile to make a beautiful headpiece for the runways. And it was an entrance for the V&A Gala Fashion Show to celebrate the London Olympics. And we had Dancheong and Bauhaus collections to showcase what Korea is all about, but in a very dynamic way. So here you can see 5 models actually posing for the photo shoots after the runway show, and see the various different prints of tancheong, not only looking like it's a traditional elements of building, but also was really a modern print or modern interpretation of black and white or beige and black with different techniques of fabrication, with hologram leather piping, with debossed leather skirts, with organzas under. And it's recently at the Lincoln Center with actually presentation with the models. And I love, actually I own the coat in the middle, which is still my favorite. Shows tancheong prints on top of also layers of different fabrication. So it has organza on top and then layers of hairy, texturized fabrics in the middle and another organza. So a lot of times it has multiple layers of different fabrics and techniques combined into one clothing. And on the right, you can see the leather piece laser cut on the shoulder. They're matched with a pleat skirt of tancheong print. And the next one is changsal. So changsal is Korean traditional window frames that were used old days. And these actually image on the cover are printed on neoprene. So neoprene was a very hot fabrication or fabrics that were used when we showed this collection. And Lee wanted to create this kind of interesting mix of always old and new, and how it changed the view of us looking at the old traditional elements from Korea. So for his collection, this one, he used hand paints on this fabrics so that it almost looked like it's a real painting. And these are examples of our changsal prints used in the collection, and you can see how each one is very much more like a hand painting of different architectural shapes. And later, it's going to be more constructed in a shape, like a dress like this one, where the model's wearing a translucent dress, white dress, onto the stage. So her hair, her hat only glows in the dark. But then when she turns on her, like the button for LED light inside of a dress, it actually becomes more like a lantern, the Korean traditional lantern, and shows what he wanted to show, like translating how, actually it's like when you have a candle lit on inside of the room, that's how people will see your room from outside. So this was one of the collection that people think it was super hip, even though from Korean, we know that it was, from elements from the traditional objects. And one of the actually first collection that we used flat heels, which was very rare back then. Also, everyone was wearing high heels for the runway, and it was a platform shoes, sneakers that we used to combine, old and new again, and showing this with the new lens of, Lee Sing-bong. And you can see also the earrings are from munkori, which is the door handles of changsal frames. And some of the editorials showing beautiful dress and neoprene coats, and a lot of neoprene coats are reversible. So he used a technique of digitally printing different patterns and different colors on in and outside of the coat, so you can wear it both ways. And you will notice those like black dots, and people think, oh, is that ripped or is that a hole in there? But it was intentional, because in the old days, people tried to actually poke the door, like they had hanji on the door to pick inside. And we actually love the story of actually poking doors and incorporated it into the print itself. And love this Vogue editorial of putting old and new also inside of the palace, the garden of the palace, showing his neoprene jacket and dresses with the traditional building meant extra special for us too. and checkery, one of my also another favorite subject that we did. So when Lee said he's so into checkery and checkado, I said, okay, I don't know if you wanted to make this very like Korean-like collection. And he said, no, I just loved every part of checkado, and it's not just about, you know, books and paintings, but it's about the lifestyle. And we wanted to actually really show this as modern lifestyle. And this quote from Mr. Lee is what I think kind of shows his world of fashion and where he's coming from. As a designer, my role is not to keep traditions in their original form, but to reinvent them through a contemporary lens. That is how I preserve tradition. And I've been hearing this a lot from him since when I was very young, and saying, just showing what it is, just showing Hangul as how it is, or Changsal or Tancheong as it is, it's not gonna fascinate people. You know, you have to really speak the language of what people are interested and what people wanted to actually look at and wear. Because in fashion, if no one wants to wear it, it's not a fashion anymore, it's art. So there's a distinctive difference between art and fashion, but we often kind of, you know, go back and forth from one to another. So one section of the presentation, you can see the model wearing collections of checkado and checkari collection. And it was our first Instagram fashion show. So that's like 2014, 2015 got really big, and you know, a couple of fashion designers start to show their collection on Instagram. And we wanted to actually have the same approach for that season, working with influencers to actually showcase the fashion show in a different angle. So instead of just models wearing the collection, we want these influencers to show their whole lifestyle, their own lifestyle with their own checkado. So the whole photo shoot, it was very interesting for us to actually set up, and working with a photographer. We worked with 2 different photographers to actually create the whole setup. Because checkado itself is, you know, it's from late 18th century, and it was the first time that Korean painters or this scholars using 2-dimensionals and 3-dimensional at the same time. So using the perspective of 3-dimensional on a 2-dimensional surface. And we think that was a brilliant idea of using it for the photo shoots as well. So there are some boxes that was, you know, like that the model goes in also. So it's bringing 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional at the same time. So we have a kind of modernized traditional form of checkado in the bag, but have a floating shelvings that are in transparent forms, but having object also floating there. But also having the models wearing checkado prints and having actual walls and actual boxes, it really illustrates the idea of how it can be playful from, you know, 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. And also creating your own bookcase of what you like and who you are as a person, of showing, reflecting your lifestyle. And we did go on after the collection. This was actually a window display of our New York flagship store in Meatpacking. And we made all the head with vintage books. We went to a lot of bookstores and found beautiful vintage books, and actually some of them are magazines of our checkari collection that we reused and create different shapes of it to represent what it is all about. And mugunghwa is a rose of Sharon, also national flowers of Korea. Was a great inspiration from one of our collection, but more translated into a digital form. And you can see that it was also used as accessories and layers of different prints. So when he has idea of utilizing traditional elements, or mugunghwa, it's more a Korean heritage. He wanted to make it much more exciting so that people are not looking at it as, oh, that's one of the interesting floral prints, or unique floral print, he always say, you know, do you know what mugunghwa is? Or do you know what changsal is? It's always bringing that question of his heritage and share with the audience also. So this is example of our New York Fashion Week and Paris Fashion Week, some of the, you know, beautiful editors. And this particular dress is mugunghwa pattern that you saw on the cover of the mugunghwa slide. And this is extremely hard to create. So there are a lot of craftsmanship and, you know, artistic sense of building the clothes in Lee Sang-bong collection. So each individual piece of silk, black and white, was cut, and then, you know, it was sewn together. But to create that shape and textures and, you know, doing the round circles without making a mess is an extremely hard job. So even though we, you know, a lot of people love this and wanted to recreate and remake this dress, it was almost impossible. For us, we only have 2 dresses that's out of this pattern. And lastly, it's a non-Korean traditional elements inspired collection, but the Bauhaus is also a big collection that's still being loved by a lot of people. One of the iconic collection of Lee Sang-bong is pretty brilliant. So this dress, it's his sketch of idea of how he's gonna put this together and creating a new dress, new form of a dress, inspired by Bauhaus. He created all these circles of organzas, laser cuts, and dyed. The edge of each fabrics are dyed with black ink. And he put them into piles of, you know, lines to create different shapes and forms. Not only that, it creates dynamic movement when the model wears it, because the layers of organza moves when they walk. And another example of the dress, it's like hundreds of layers of laser cut organza showing and moving when the model also walk or make the movement. And I love how it's not just a color, but there is also gradation of each organza shape had, you know, black edges to make it much more three-dimensional. And this was again at the Victorian Urban Museum Gala Fashion Show, and I love this long dress making a huge statement. It has much more movement than any other dresses in this, you know, silk organza cutouts. And especially on the bottom of the dress, you can see that it's like, you know, Changyangja's vase dress. It actually has the shape of the ball. So when you move, whole circle motion of the ball makes it, you know, it's more like dancing of the model on the stage. And America's Next Top Model actually had a fashion show in Seoul. I don't know if you saw Cycle 21. But it happened in Seoul, one of the, you know, first episode internationally, and Mr. Lee also dressed everyone, the 15 finalists, in our archival collections and had a runway, and you can see tancheong dress, that hologram tancheong dress in front, to Bauhaus dress, and other collections on the runway. And it was also a beautiful exhibition of different dresses, some of the editorials. I love how this dress has a contrast of being a flat, you know, hanging on the hanger, still shows the volume and movement and shapes, whereas the model's wearing it much more like, you know, it's almost like a flower coming out. Love this editorial too. I'm just gonna quickly show all the rest just because we're running out of time. And love the idea of, this was part of Minnie Mouse's 80th birthday, and Lee Sang-bong created a whole collection that's exactly the same as how we had a Bauhaus dress, and the bag also in leather, and was used at an auction at Christie's. And his quote also, he always said, there's no limit, there's no boundaries, and there's no yes and no in fashion, and being yourself is the most important thing. And as a designer also, and as a creator, he emphasized on having your individuality and have your own beauty is what makes you very special. And some of the examples of our permanent collection at the Victoria Urban Museum. In the middle, you see the origami dress. On the center, you see the beautiful shapes of drapes. And also at FIT Museum, Paras Museum, and Welt Museum as well. And we have 5 pieces at the George Washington Textile Museum, and we're so proud and thanking Lee Talbot and Dr. Chung Young for having this opportunity to showcase our collection, and hope to see you guys there to actually see the actual fabrication of the collection. Thank you so much.
All right, so we will spend about 20 minutes fielding questions from you. Those who have questions, please raise your hand. We will circulate a mic, handheld mic. Yes, do we have a mic? Yes, okay, there we go. And if you could tell us who you're addressing the question to.
Okay, this question is for Mr. Lee and Ms. Pyun. When you think about hanbok, usually what you think about is the female version of hanbok, and maybe male version of hanbok is less versatile and used in far fewer situations. In my own case, I used it on my 100-day celebration and 1 year, and then during my wedding, during the pedicure. So why is it that female hanbok is so versatile and male hanbok is often not used as in so many different situations?
Should I use this microphone? Do you have a comment?
Yeah, during the colonial period, I mean, from my research, I mean, the male dress was mainly, let's say, the Western style costume. At that time, in terms of the hanbok, from the male's position, the court dress was the first sort of initiative who took in charge of sort of changing of the style at the time. And since then, the male costume wasn't kind of less sort of active for actual consumption, if I may say. And also, their sort of public figure was mainly done by the Western guard rather than the traditional hanbok dress. So that's the kind of the quite opposite case to the women's case. And today I showed a lot of women's case. But I mean, I guess there are many sort of the styling there. I kind of omitted one particular case, but the Hokkyeo's commented on the sort of the style of the city people that time in Gyeongsang. He also mentioned about one male journalist, Song Jin-woon, and he might be look better with some Jeollado Yangban style, meaning Jeollado Yangban sort of the hanbok style there. So there's a clearly certain sense of the fashion there. However, let's say there are some kind of differences within the gender role in there. Yeah.
So I want to add, so going back to the 18th century, like a pre-modern period, just like animal world, male dresses are more expressive because they go to the public space. And it is to show off their social hierarchy. So we didn't cover the 18th century, but it is usually considered the Joseon dynasty, late Joseon Renaissance, like a Yeongjeongju Renaissance, named after those kings. And you can definitely see the expansion of commercial trade in menswear. So turumagi has really, really wide sleeves. That is, conspicuous consumption, and you use extra, cloth in order to show off that excessiveness. And as you understand, the dress includes bodily ornaments, right? It's not just about the clothes that you wear on the body, but includes all kinds of your body configuration. So when it comes to headgear, that is very expensive consumption. Traditional hat is made of horsehair. Where do they raise horse? Usually from Jeju Island. And horsehair is so thin, like a hair, you can only imagine how long it will take. And in order to supplement the leg of horsehair, you can also create your hat with bamboo threads. So it's as thin as, again, your hair, and you weave them together. So that's a conspicuous consumption, just like a beaver hat, like a top hat in the European fashion. So menswear, in this particular case, because the exhibited items are far way more for women's wear, that's why we focused on women's wear. But menswear, they have a wide range of it. And going back to the Jungtaek period, like 1930s and 40s, people created durumagi out of woolen textiles. And when it comes to woolen textiles, it's the exactly same with men's suit. So it's either striped or fine wool or silk and wool blend, those things. And there was an exhibition at Daegu Textile Museum, and it showed 100 years of menswear. And in it, you can find a lot of modern period durumagi made of European textiles. So men were always interested in fashion, and they are also fashion leaders. And simply, you don't see a lot in exhibited context. But Korean men, as of now, you hear about beauty products, right, consumed by men. And it's really fashionable people. So I hope you can explore a little bit more of those diverse range of menswear at the either National Palace Museum or the Seoul History Museum has a lot of examples from the early 20th century. We have a lot of imported materials too. So that's again conspicuous consumption. You get the hats from England and France.
Thank you very much. If you have not noticed yet, Jungtaek is actually wearing hanbok or Gejo hanbok, right? And yes, he's a walking display showcase here. I'm gonna take two questions and combine it into one from online, and this is for Michael. How has the perception of Korea changed in terms of global fashion industry? What are some of those factors that enabled that kind of perception change? And are there any special or unique trends that you have noticed while you were shooting this past decade or so?
Well, yeah, I think the key factor is social media, Western social media, specifically Instagram. And I think that's what has catapulted Korea onto the international fashion stage. A lot of people in high fashion don't like this argument, but it's basically a bunch of kids on Instagram who are representing, Korean coolness and putting Korean design aesthetics basically into the international mix. To the point where I did an editorial shoot in Hanoi during COVID, and when you could still take the plane at the beginning. And I remember the model, and I said, "Oh wow, you look really Korean." And her reaction was, "Thank you." It's a huge compliment. So I think people have a sense of, if, for example, in Vietnam, Koreans look cool, but whenever, even if you're not interested in Korea, when you go to try to look cool and edgy, it ends up being Korean. So the way to kind of back into the second question is, in Vietnam, I had this, in 2017, there was this off-shoulder, off-center kind of shirt dress, the big collar that goes over one shoulder. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but I noticed that being worn on the streets of Hanoi. So to kind of track Korean fashion influence, I would pull people who were obviously doing Korean fashions at the time, and started noticing that a lot of people were into Korean stuff, but I also started noticing that the wearer didn't know that it was Korean. It was just, well, it's cool. So to me, that was a sign of success.
Great, thank you. You had a question right here in the front.
Thank you for your fascinating presentations. I have a question. Can hanbok be really a mainstream fashion in worldwide theater? If you think so, what are the elements that would enable hanbok to become mainstream
think that's a pretty open-ended question for any of us here, or any of you, sorry, not me. Lee, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I can say a few words about it. I think, you know, K-pop has done a lot in terms of just bringing it out to the general public. And so in the exhibition, we have, you know, a few designers who really became extremely popular because they were worn in K-pop videos. So, and worn by K-pop stars as well. And I'm just thinking, for example, of Jisoo, you know, the designer Hwang Jisoo. And often when you look at her runway shows and such, she is using models of many, many different ethnicities. And she's making the obvious point that she's designing Shin Hanbok, or a new style of Hanbok, but she's not designing it for Koreans, you know, exclusively. She's designing it more for you know, for international audiences. And I think one you know, one aspect of this Shin Hanbok, New Hanbok is that it's not constructed exactly in the same way as old Hanbok. And I think that was one big obstacle, and not just for international audiences, but for Koreans as well, is that traditional Hanbok was hard to wear. You know, it was a lot of like tying and layers. It's not exactly a comfortable kind of garment to wear. And then also, particularly in the 20th century, as Hanbok became formal wear, the fabrics were very fine and expensive, and so you got into maintenance that was difficult for Hanbok. So when you combine uncomfortability, maintenance, all of those things, you know, you know, Hanbok was just not so wearable. But the Shin Hanbok, similarly, you know, they're going for wearability and ease of care. So you're seeing a lot of the fabrics. They're not traditional fabrics anymore. You know, there's cotton polyester blends. They're machine washable, so that people can easily wear them, take care of them, wear them every day. I'm not sure if it's really taking off, but I think maybe we're at, maybe Michael or someone could speak to this, but I think we're maybe at beginning stages, that we're starting to see non-Koreans starting to adopt some of these new Hanbok styles, not necessarily the traditional Hanbok style.
Yeah. So I'm not a Hanbok expert, obviously, but I did work, for example, since this picture's up there, I did work with a designer named Kim-Renaud, who has her own brand, and was one of the, in a way, pioneers of kind of the rental Hanbok industry, especially when that was starting to shift over from buying these expensive things for big events to just kind of temporary fleeting use. But one of the things when I came out here with this idea to this Harley Quinn inspired, for this model who sees into that sort of thing, this Harley Quinn inspired Hanbok concept, she said, oh, well, why don't you, I want to do Hanbok with pants. And I said, can Hanbok have pants? She's like, yeah. Not a lot of people know about this particular kind of pants, but you know, mining that kind of unknown aspect of the Hanbok and that kind of off to the side design element really make, I mean, there's so much of the Hanbok that isn't the very narrow final version that we tend to see today that can be combined in different ways to be combined with updated concepts. I think it makes the Hanbok very versatile as a photographic concept or kind of an element.
Nana, do you have anything to add to that?
I think, as a brand, we're not stuck to one sort of design, but we're happy to see that a lot of younger designers are actually taking a part of interpreting Hanbok into their collection, or gets inspiration specific from details and elements from Hanbok and use it in a very versatile way or modern way. I think it's a great opportunity for more people to know about it and wear.
Jungtaek, do you have anything to say?
Well, I'm kind of making Hanbok with the bit of tradition from Britishness plus the Koreanness.
Yes,
sorry, yeah. In that sense, I think, for instance, the Isangbong's dress, in terms of form, it's not Hanbok, but he bravely and wonderfully brought the characteristics of the Korean. Its character, its letter, Hangul, and the check out all the images. So it's based on how you define the Hanbok, right? So, for instance, the BTS costume is worldwide known, and it's made by Easel, and its sort of stage costume was a hugely success. And we know that the Hanbok, that kind of Hanbok style was sort of the popular through the audiences and the K-pop fans. But as a maker for the Hanbok brand or even Shinhanbok brand, shall we keep the form as much as the traditional continuing the Hanbok form, or shall we change the form and bring other sort of the elements into the Hanbok design? And if you look at sort of the Hanbok industry in Korea, there are kind of two kinds of sort of awareness to see the Hanbok. One is kind of a bit of conservative, so people may point out that it is not Hanbok if you make some huge, sort of the designs onto the Hanbok. And so people change a little bit of the details and colors and fabrics. So it's kind of the how you see the Hanbok, but also the audience sort of respond to the Hanbok, and also the buyers respond to the Hanbok, I think.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful series of lectures. I learned so much, and it was very rich and evocative. I had a question that came to mind when Dr. Herb was mentioning Baudrillard, which was that despite the fact that all of these presentations were so rich, there was something missing for me that I wanted to know about, which was where scholarship is going on Korean fashion right now, in terms of what the theoretical themes are that are taking place. Is it in semiotics? Is it in notions of the hyperreal or simulacra? Is it in the risks or challenges of Orientalism? Is it about masculine and feminine gaze and how gender performance is being articulated? If somebody, it's not a question for just one person, but if somebody's willing to answer it, I'd love to hear where you think scholarship in humanities is headed for fashion. Thank you.
Because you mentioned it.
Because yeah, somebody said Baudrillard, so I have to say something. But yeah, all the things you just mentioned, from what I noticed in Korean fashion scholarship, I'm not as versed in the Korean language articles as I should be, but I've had to look for things. And frankly, when you talk about the most numerous amounts of scholars, fashion professors who are in the Pediqua, fashion design departments, most of what they teach is how to cut clothes. And I asked some of my students who are in these departments, and they talk about the fact that, and I said, how much do you learn about Korean fashion history? They're like, nothing, unless it's an elective. They learn Western fashion history, they learn how to cut things, and they don't really look at fashion culture at all. In fact, a lot of the people who, when I've had my articles have to be reviewed, they have to find somebody who's generally a fashion design department professor. My work is very disliked. I'll just say it that way. But looking at Korean fashion culture, not many people are really looking at that in the official fashion field. No one's really taking all those points that you just mentioned are basically like squarely like Marxist cultural studies. That's not what fashion design professors have studied or are comfortable with. So I don't want to say nobody's doing it, but not many people are doing it in the fashion design departments. Or if you look at fashion in sociology, That's kind of where I've been deciding, and I've been doing my stuff, ethnography, ethnographic practice. The better my pictures have gotten. I've tried to add in more techniques. The more magazine-y they look, the less respect I get as a scholar. So that's also an issue.
Thank you. Yeah, Kyunghee, actually, yeah.
So I am teaching, mainly from historical perspective, but I am in the field of fashion studies and dress history intertwined together. And in order to answer your questions, the gender nonconformity in recent queer studies that also has a huge impact on fashion studies as well in general in Korea, and the cultural capital and social capital, symbolic capital, this type of sociological background has a huge impact on understanding of fashion culture. But among sociologists, what I see as a growing trend in methodology is analyzing internet activities. It's now called ethnography. They are not doing ethnography by interviewing the real people. They actually go into the blogs or these Instagram accounts and study their feedbacks. And there are a lot of participatory action research, like what audiences are talking about the dress culture itself from their perspective. And then but I, as a historian, I think we should approach fashion studies from perspective of technology and innovation. As other studies have shown, the advancement of communication tools had a huge impact on dissemination of fashion, and that should be studied in terms of technology and innovation, and textiles as well. That's actually history of science very much involved. But in terms of theories, we currently, in Korean language studies, they use all kinds of sociological, anthropological perspectives that are very popular in non-Korean fashion studies as well. So it's very current. There are certain lack of historical background, but when it comes to fashion studies, there are a lot of artists, and media studies is really popular too. How consumption of fashion is portrayed in media, not in real market piece. So that's what I want to say.
Great, thank you. We have a question right here.
Thank you. Thank you all for the presentations. I have two questions that go in slightly different directions. So, Professor Hart, I was wondering if you said very quickly when things get K-fied, it's as if you take something that has street cred or that has an earnest emergence out of the culture, and you basically add a culture industry aura as if it is under control or as if it is manufactured. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
I wrote this thing I was talking about. I talked to my students about once you put a K signifier in front of things, you have to ask yourself, it becomes kind of culture industry thing, but you have to ask yourself, what the K actually signifies? Because it's not really Korean. It's obviously Korean pop, Korean cinema, but it's not really K. The reason Bong Joon-ho is hot is not because of his Korean elements, right? It's him taking elements from genre horror, a whole bunch of other genres, and mixing them together in a way, which is, as I said in that news thing, that's the remix is what's Korean. The K-pop, it's a mixture of ballads, for the Boys to Men era, boy groups, girl groups, rap, and lots more rap. And none of it comes from Korea, but it's K-pop because of the mix. But once you get the official K put on in front of it, the Ministry of Culture takes credit for it. And that's why I always bristle at K fashion, because I'm trying to be put into a category of K fashion to be included in conferences and things. So they're like, you're K fashion, right? I'm like, right. Do I get to come? Am I paid to get? Then I'm K fashion. But that's also a problem because I think this field is the most from the bottom up, the most actually from the street. Like these kids slogging it out. not Twitter, because that's for old people. But yeah, they've built this thing up. And frankly speaking, I just don't want to get in trouble. But I've gotten in trouble for it. So, I mean, when Concept Korea was running at New York Fashion Week, I didn't go. I don't have access to New York Fashion Week. I'm not that bling bling with my photography. But I know all the runway photographers from the Korean agencies who are hired by the city, Ministry of Culture. They all tell me. So I was like, what's up with Concept Korea? They're like, yeah, nobody of Korean folks and their friends. I mean, it's just kind of like this, I don't want to say it. I'm not going to say it's a Ponzi scheme, but I mean, I just did. But it's like, you know, the money goes up, you have these exhibitions, special Korean showcases, and it's made for the Korean media to brag about. So the ministry puts in money, culture ministry puts in money, these things happen, and you don't really see a huge increase in the popularity of Korean fashion. But when these kids came onto Instagram, I mean, everybody knows what Korean people are wearing now. The Fila Disruptor, there's a zillion examples. But yeah, once you put the K in front of it, it becomes a totally different narrative. That's often not accurate.
Okay, well, for the interest of time, we're going to have to stop here. Thank you very much. Please join us upstairs on the 7th floor for lunch. It's a great city view. And thank you for joining our KHMS Colloquium. And we'll see you upstairs.